This week, Santiago Torres Arias, assistant professor at Purdue University, is here with us this evening to discuss how everything's valid in code and war, attacks on the software supply chain. In the security news, AI on your pie, no flipper for you, stealing Teslas by accident, firmware at scale, the future of the Linux desktop, protect your attributes, SOX 5 for your burp, TPM 2.0 vulnerabilities, the world's most vulnerable door device and hiding from air quotes real hackers, sandwiches, robot lawyers, poisonous EpiPens, and profanity in your code. All that and more on this episode of Paul's Security Weekly. This is a Security Weekly production for security professionals by security professionals. Please visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe to all the shows on our network. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where exploits run wild, packets aren't the only things getting sniffed, and the cocktails flow steady. It's Paul's Security Weekly.
Hi, folks.
And
I'm
welcome to
the host of Enterprise Security Weekly.
Shall we try that again?
This week, Santiago Torres Arias, assistant professor at Purdue University, discusses how everything's valid in code and war, attacks on the software supply chain. In the security news, AI on your pie, no flipper for you, stealing Teslas by accident, firmware at scale, the future of the Linux desktop, protect your attributes, SOX 5 for your burp, TPM 2.0 vulnerabilities, the world's most vulnerable door device, and hiding from air quotes real hackers, sandwiches, robot lawyers, poisonous EpiPens, and profanity in your code. All that and more on this episode of Paul's Security Weekly. This is a Security Weekly production for security professionals by security professionals. Please visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe to all the shows on our network. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where exploits run wild, packets aren't the only things getting sniffed, and the cocktails flow steady. It's Paul's Security Weekly.
Oh, hey, welcome to the show. Yeah, hey, let me introduce you to a man that just found out which days of the week were the strongest. Saturday and Sunday. The rest are just weekdays. Mr. Paul Asadorian.
Welcome, everyone, to Paul's Security Weekly. It's episode number 776, being recorded on March 15th, 2023, right here in G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island. To my left, Mr. Larry Pesce.
Hey, how's it going?
Good to have you, man.
Yeah, we missed you last week.
Yeah, I missed doing the show.
I wouldn't exactly say we missed you. We missed you last week.
Larry and I did a review. We should have recorded it. I think we might, I don't know, we might talk about doing that. But Early Times Kentucky whiskey comes in this beautifully packaged plastic bottle. We said it had notes of
floral notes of
pine sol
and athlete's foot.
Yes.
Is that fish on it?
Yes,
I mean, does it have aftertaste of fish?
Freshwater fish. So you got bass, rainbow trout, let's see, pike, sunfish, bluegill.
And surprisingly, no aftertaste of fish. It had an aftertaste of pine sol and sour feet.
Foot.
Yep, athlete's foot. Yep.
Foot, yeah. Feet. Yes. Miss Mandy Logan is here with us. Mandy, welcome.
Good evening. So somebody gave me a gift the other day randomly of green apple Smirnoff, and I'm not sure if I should be insulted. I just don't know.
It also came in a plastic bottle. So I mean,
It's a plastic bottle.
All fine spirits come in plastic bottles, just like all fine wine comes in a box. Mr. Sam Bound is here with us. Sam, welcome.
Good evening. I'm thinking that making whiskey out of fish might be more environmentally sustainable. The only thing cooler would be to make it out of algae.
That's
Oh.
true. Mr. Tyler Robinson is here. Tyler, it's good to see you, man.
Good to see you too, buddy.
Well,
How you been?
You've been busy. We haven't like hung out like virtually or not. It's very sad. It's nice to have you on the show though.
Yeah, bad guys don't stop. So it's been busy.
Sorry, I keep reading Tyler's shirt.
Be a part of the 2023 SC Awards. The prestigious and competitive SC Awards program recognizes outstanding innovations, organizations, and leaders that are advancing the practice of information security. This year, there are awards in 36 categories up for grabs, including Best IT Security-Related Training Program, Inventor of the Year, Best SASE Product, and more. Visit securityweekly.com/SC Awards to submit your entries by March 13th, which only applies to those that have time machines. Santiago, that's right. Santiago is an assistant professor at Purdue's Electrical and Computer Engineering Department. His interests include binary analysis, cryptography, distributed systems, and security-oriented software engineering. His current research focuses on securing the software development lifecycle, cloud security, and update systems. Santiago is also a member of the Arch Linux security team and has contributed patches to open source projects on various degrees of scale, a maintainer for the update framework, and lead in the InToto and SigStore projects. Santiago, welcome to the show.
Hello, it's my pleasure to be here.
Thank you for joining us this evening. Santiago, how did you get your start in information security?
It's been quite a while, but I think I actually started with physical security first. I was kind of into lockpicking and this sort of a capability of opening devices and understanding them and being able to change them. And so I started doing software. I realized that this sort of a compulsion transfers between physical and virtual.
Nice. And what got you interested in the kind of supply chain aspect of security?
Well, when I was starting my graduate studies, I was already into information security. I was trying to do very high level crypto, very theoretical stuff. But I ran into who eventually became my PhD advisor, who was working on a project called Tough. And I was mystified because the idea behind Tough was just, how to get an update from a system securely. And I thought, it's 2010. Somebody must have figured this one out. And after looking into the weeds and reading the papers and whatnot, I started realizing that it's really not that easy, and it's also a very, very good way to attack people. If you look at some of the OG large-scale software supply chain attacks, the one that attacked software update systems, you have things like Flame, the malware that by now it's in the history books. You have things that nation states are able to use to essentially control a whole population or a whole country. And that's when I realized that, first of all, it's not an easy problem to solve, and second of all, it's it can really cause a lot of devastating damage. Of course, this was before SolarWinds and Log4j and all of that. So I was, I was almost ready for this to happen.
You were excited when that happened, huh?
It was somewhat of a told you moment.
Yeah,
but,
yeah. Well, it's interesting too.
good.
I mean, in order to gain control of a aspect of a supply chain, right? That could be part of a like some aspect of a supply chain. You do have to use likely exploits of some kind, right? Like the initial access. Once you get that, though, you leveraging that to gain access to other systems, as I think you've already said, Santiago, is like a very elegant and almost easier way to do that rather than breaking in all the systems individually. And that's really one of the things that makes it a target for attackers, right?
Definitely. I think that's what makes it so interesting, that it requires you to understand the fundamentals of cybersecurity and even advanced cybersecurity that goes from, like, I don't know, secure boot all the way to applied crypto, but also apply it in somewhat of a socio-technical fabric, right? You need to think about, if somebody hacks into this part of the supply chain, they may be able to get away with something that's way more devastating than just breaking some, I don't know, bootloader on a certain machine or something like that. And that's kind of what makes it so much fun, to be quite honest.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting too. Your involvement in Linux is kind of what sparked my whole interest in all these segments that we've done on supply chain. Is how do you protect the Linux user? Right. I don't want to just pin it to Linux desktop users. Like all three of us are very aware of this problem. But not just Linux desktop, but Linux servers. How do I get software down on my systems securely? Right. I mean, that was some of the first times I started looking at Linux and started doing package updates. I'm like, cool, is software coming from somewhere? How do we protect it and protect our users in this ecosystem?
Right. So, It's funny you mentioned Linux, because I was just I was just watching The Last of Us, the HBO series, last weekend. I just binged it all. And this, like, virus that takes over the planet that just pretty much causes civilization fallout, it's on the wheat, on every single thing that's eaten. And that's the way I see Linux. It's such a fundamental part of the internet, of the cyber world, that if you are able to break into something that's fundamental as the Linux kernel, then you pretty much have the keys to the kingdom. And, well, yeah, that's the place that we need to spend a lot of our efforts.
And wasn't there so we talked about the Galen Erso bug, right? The Death Star plans, where he purposely put that vulnerability in there. That was like the big realization for me when I watched Rogue One. I'm like, that was put there on purpose. I'm like, what are the examples of that happening in software? And I think you, Santiago, pointed out there was a research paper that was retracted where, was it graduate students did that? They introduced vulnerabilities through pull requests in the Linux kernel? Yeah,
so that was actually something that I got to exercise or like experience from both the academic and the open source world. Part of my research is, again, on this software supply chain attacks, but I try to build systems. So I don't effectively try to hack on systems. I try to understand how systems can be hacked. And there was this paper from University of Minnesota, I think it was, that they were trying to essentially do this sort of attack. They called it the hypocrite commit attack. You're essentially being two-faced about the whole open source software contribution. And when I heard about it, I was like, wow, this is amazing. I got to read this paper even before it comes out. And then I asked around in the Linux kernel IRC channels, and they were like, they did what? And then suddenly I realized that this had been happening. Push comes to shove, a couple of months pass, and no harm done, really. But it really does highlight how even a researcher could attempt to do something like this. What I think was more scary on this aspect is that I don't think we understand the supply chain, especially for the Linux kernel as it is. Even if you ask for Linux kernel developers themselves, they don't know who's doing what, right? An example that from a colleague at the Arch Linux security team, Morten Linderud, he was mentioning that, for example, Debian and Ubuntu, they pull patches out of the version control of the Linux kernel without looking at it. They called it automatic backports. The consequence of this is that maybe they put the hypocrite commit and nobody knows if it was done, and then there's really not an easy way to check if this happened. So all in all, big mess.
But these researchers from the University of Minnesota, I read their paper and their retraction, which is like, I mean, a rabbit hole, because their retraction includes the email correspondence that they had with the Linux kernel team. And it gets kind of, there's a lot of friction there, of course. But the whole reason they had to retract it was not because it was successful or not successful. They just failed to get permission to do this. Is that an accurate assessment?
That's pretty much within the ballpark. Without getting too lost into the bureaucracy, essentially what happens is they needed to get permission from the university as well. Any sort of research that requires human subjects needs to go through a part of the university called an institutional review board. They take a look at all of this sort of protocols, and they try to assess the damage and minimize harm and all these sort of nice things that you want to do with modern research. To my understanding, they didn't do that, and they didn't even tell the Linux kernel developers. Yeah. So, yeah, it was pretty much in violation of a couple of things. I think it's unfortunate because at the end of the day, every single practitioner that I asked, like, hey, do you think this could happen? They go like, yeah, of course. Somebody could just underhandedly put a patch that has a vulnerability on it. Why wouldn't you be able to do that, right? So yeah, it's almost unfair to the researchers to not be able to show it, but it's also unfair to the open source community to do it in such a way.
Now, one could play devil's advocate and go, there's so many vulnerabilities that exist already that we don't need to introduce new ones.
Yeah, there's actually very interesting research from this academic at NYU, Brendan Dolan-Gavitt. He actually came up with this system to introduce more vulnerabilities that were harder to exploit or easier to exploit, but not as damaging, just to make hackers more, I guess, confused. So, I don't know. Everything is valid, right?
Right. Yeah. What do the Linux kernel developers, and I know you're involved with some of this with Arch Linux as well, how do you validate all of these patches and pull requests coming in? Because it seemed to me that the University of Minnesota case that at least a couple of the kernel developers were like, no, that's not flying, right?
Yeah, I mean that was also funny because during the fallout of this whole thing, it took the. So imagine, I don't know, you run into somebody and they tell you like, hey, I don't know, your windshield is broken in your car, and you go like, I don't think it's broken, but you start trying to check a little bit more carefully, right? So when all of this thing came down, a lot of kernel developers were like looking at these patches and they were like, I don't think there's anything wrong with them. So a bunch of them were actually not really vulnerable. The researchers failed to actually introduce these vulnerabilities.
But it's interesting that some of them were rejected not because it was a vulnerability, but they were just rejected because of like other reasons. So I mean that breeds some faith for me, especially in the Linux kernel, which I think is doing a really good job of protecting that basically critical asset for the internet as a whole and computing as a whole, right?
For sure, yeah. I think if there's a golden standard on this, it's the Linux kernel. But that's the thing, right? People are not trying to do this to the Linux kernel. If I had to guess, they would try to do it on some random, I don't know, TIFF processing library that nobody's using it, or something that manages, like, I don't know, Windows media files or things that you just really don't look at, but they're included by every single browser, and they have very weak sandboxing at times, and everybody transcodes weird file formats automatically. So that's where I'm scared about, not exactly the Linux kernel.
Santiago, tell me about the project, the Update Framework. You mentioned it earlier as one of the first, I think, projects you were involved in the software supply chain, correct?
Yeah. So the Update Framework is a system to. Let me actually start with the tagline. I think that's very evocative. It essentially is the S in HTTPS, but for update systems. The idea is that you can add this overlay on your update stack, and it manages all of the security aspects of your update system. Historically, this project started by looking at how can a nation-state attacker try to modify the way that an update system works to compromise pretty much anybody that's updating a system, right? Again, think about the scale, right? There was this example. I have this collection of open source supply chain compromises that I look at. There's this example of I think it was North Korea replaced a PHP package on the South Korean mirror, which again, it's why would they do that, right? So the update framework tries to take a look at it from that perspective, and it adds a lot of security properties that a lot of update systems really do not have. It's actually, historically, it came also from cooperation with the people at the Tor project to update the Tor browser. Part of a challenge there is a lot of the people that are using the Tor browser are activists in, I don't know, oppressive regimes and, I don't know, in the middle of a war zone and things like that. So you want to really step up the game and make sure that people that are trying to target that like last mile aren't able to fully compromise the system, that you can recover from the compromise, that you don't lose the root of trust if, I don't know, a hash algorithm is broken and things like that.
So in those cases, do you see from both a real world and kind of an academic standpoint the big push for the SBOM? SBOM makes a lot of sense. There's a lot of things that it's going to provide. But again, I think we're seeing this as kind of the silver lining panacea that everybody's after. And in those cases where you're talking about a supply chain attack and maybe not able to detect or see those tainted packages, do you see the SBOM being able to help, or is that kind of an after-action remediation step?
I think it has a couple of problems, but again, I will preface everything that I'm going to say with I love SBOMs, and I think the community is working behind it. I worked for a little while with the SPDX people, and they're like doing a fantastic job. I think part of the problem is, and without getting too academic, I think there's an abstraction, which is the software supply chain, and then there's what really is a software supply chain, and it's not necessarily a supply chain. But it helps us understand how things are working. The reason why I'm telling you this is because software supply chain compromises in general have different shapes, and I don't think there's a solution that fits everything. If anything, if I had to make a prediction, I think there's going to be a large-scale open source software like supply chain attack. There's going to be an SBOM involved, and we're going to look at it and go like, oh yeah, of course, we need to add more stuff to the SBOM. I think we need to look at it from the opposite perspective, and we need to start trying to predict how these things are going to start shaping up, and maybe come up with other solutions that work alongside like the SBOM ecosystem in a sense. But take a look at the things that are coming, right?
I want to talk about Linux for a moment, because this thing that sparked this whole thing, and it's interesting how this debate and kind of ongoing projects are still talking about this issue of how do I get software to a Linux system, right? We use this as an example. I think it applies to other operating systems, but Linux being free and open, it breeds a lot more of the software distribution mechanisms, such as apt and apt repositories. Then you've got Flatpak, you've got Snap, you've got Arch Linux that has its own packaging mechanism. Am I missing one? App images are another. I mean, you could always compile from source, but like, who wants to go through that headache anymore? I mean, unless you use Gentoo, you do.
And they do that every day.
And they do that every day. But given all of these mechanisms, I think kind of like usability, stability aside, my primary concern with all of these is security. Like, how can I trust? In Santiago, it's not so much I don't trust who wrote the code, because I got a higher degree because you are involved with the other project, SigStore, right? So that breeds confidence that whoever wrote this code, it's good. But I'm worried about who packaged and distributes it in that supply chain. And when I take all this software down on a Linux system, how do I know it hasn't been tampered with at that kind of last leg, last mile?
So it's funny that you mention it, because I think it's almost unfair to packagers, because problem with supply chains is that any step in the chain, it's game over, right?
Mm-hmm.
They could hack some FTP mirror that, I don't know. From packaging software, I've seen things like, every time PyOpenCL is updated and it's tagged on the GitHub repo, the maintainer forgets to sign the tag.
Mm.
They're getting better, but every time I need to send them an email going like, hey, by the way, I cannot verify the signature on your thing because there's no signature. And well, it's almost like every single step is game over, right? It takes one mistake and everybody gets hacked. That's also partly why I think we need to develop better systems to provide better traceability all throughout the chain.
Well, what do you think of a solution like ISO 27000, which is supposed to secure the whole chain for making military products?
So I think in general, that's when I think the abstraction for supply chains breaks down a little bit. I think what we have in software is that it is not that anybody walks into into the software mines every morning and then they start like mining software and then they come up with like software ores and then they move it to through a supply chain and there's like chains of custody and people sign off the handover and things like that. Although I have a system that tries to do that, it is a little bit more immediate and it's way more automated. And I think something like a third-party certification, like ISO, taking a look at your processes and telling you that they're right or wrong, is applicable to certain extent. But I think we also need to think about the way that this sort of like immediate software development happens, right? We think about CI/CD and like pretty much push to deploy in less than 5 seconds as something that also changes and reconfigures itself every day, right?
Yeah, but it just seems to me like your supply chain is the same as a manufacturing supply chain, and you could have a special secure version of Linux that meets some compliance standard, and then you'd have some higher belief that every step has been audited and make sure that it's all using proper cryptographic protections and so on.
That's things that we run into. For example, FIPS compliant in a bunch of like HSMs exists, right? And part of what they're trying to look at is, well, did you implement the algorithms? Are they implemented correctly? Do you follow export laws? Things of that nature. I agree, but I think for maybe very highly critical processes or projects, you may be able to achieve it, and when you have like a very low turnaround time. I do think that things similar to the cloud, it may be way harder. I think if anything, we need to develop the same types of techniques, but in ways that they apply to the way that we develop software. Does this make sense?
Well, in a private company like Microsoft, you don't have this same issue, right? Because all the developers are in the company and they're being supervised and audited and such, right?
Yeah. So I'll let you take that one.
But there was a great story. Well, it was a bad story from Microsoft, but it was a great story where they had a contractor that had a certain level of access to the code behind the Microsoft Store, and they provided a mechanism for developers to be able to test their code and perform transactions all the way up to the point where like the transaction would go through, but there was just no credit card that was processed on the back end for testing. This developer figured out that he could buy gift cards, but the gift card was still emailed to him, even though he didn't pay for it, because that mechanism was broken. And through a couple of bugs, turns out he had a pretty nice side business to the tune of millions of dollars at one point that he was selling. I mean, because it's 100% profit, he's selling the gift cards. And the only reason I truly believe, if you listen to the story, that he got caught was like all great criminals get too greedy. And he was doing it at scale. And it was at scale that all of a sudden Microsoft started noticing that was happening. I firmly believe had that kind of flown under the radar and kept it small, that would have gone on for a long time.
Well,
yeah,
but I mean,
there's also another example from Microsoft where they pushed an update that actually bricked a lot of computers. It actually bricked the computers. And for a while, they weren't fully able to understand what happened. And it turns out that it was an internal beta release that somebody needed to sign off, and they signed off by mistake or something, and then it went off the races. Everybody in that patch Tuesday, I guess, I don't think it was even released on a patch Tuesday, the few people that actually update in time have their motherboards essentially blown away.
Yeah, and I think Black Lotus is a great example too, where we look at the supply chain of the entire boot process, right? And we do our due diligence and we enable secure boot, although I have data that shows that not everyone enables secure boot. That's a different topic, right? But let's just say you are enabling secure boot, and the attacker in this case, what gets me is they're able to bring their own vulnerable bootloader. And since Microsoft has not issued updated the revocation list for these bootloaders, plural, it basically gives us a forever day that is a nice kind of supply chain style attack. How do we combat this problem? I'm going to convince Microsoft to push a revocation list, which I think helps.
Can you add some kind of third-party revocation list, like antivirus at that level or something?
Well, see, that kind of breaks the whole principle of the root of trust, right? No, you can't just extend roots of trust to other people, because then it's like a tree of trust at that point. It's not as trustworthy. I had the same.
There's some OEMs overlay some of that, right, where they're building a custom BIOS or BIOS loader that is leveraging what they consider secure, but that's usually further down the stream and not further up the stream. I think that would be a good place if anybody was going to do it, that they could do it.
Well, didn't that happen with Lenovo and Superfish?
Yes.
They essentially injected a backdoor in all of their laptops.
Yep. That was exactly what I was thinking, the exact opposite way. That's a bad thing in some cases.
Yeah.
Could you just block all kernel modules, not let any new ones be added? How often do you have to add one anyway?
You'd be surprised.
Yeah, I was going to say, that's actually pretty active. You probably could for very
on the server
static systems.
Yeah.
Yep.
On the server, I find a lot of times on the server side, Tyler, that you can get to a point where you're replacing your own platform key and key exchange key and just owning that whole root of trust, because you're like, this is not going to change. It's totally static, right? So you're just basically taking over the secure boot supply chain and the boot supply chain at that point.
I think some of those kernel modules, though, even there are certain kernel modules that hook driver functionality, and you end up with some weird dependency issues with some of the way that drivers load a driver update or a hardware, call it an IC2 flash or something like that then affects the driver and the driver fails. Then you end up with a bigger problem. I think that's usually the reason why most people don't mess at that level, is because of the chain reaction that's unintended.
Yeah, and Santiago, you've looked into some of this stuff. I think you were telling me earlier that you really like the kind of picking on the firmware supply chain because it's easy pickings.
Yeah, well, there's another academic at Harvard. It says IoT and embedded. It's almost like we forgot about the last 20 years of software compromises, and we're starting to come up with everything together. But it's interesting because when you think about, I don't know if you know how the firmware on your machine updates if it's a Linux machine.
The answer is it depends. If they've put it in LVFS, it can update that way. However, it depends on which firmware you're updating. So I've looked into this quite a bit actually. In order to update something like an Intel ME, I'd have to boot on Windows and use the OEM supplied tools to update it. So you bring up a very good point. For Linux users, it can be super hard.
It is super tricky, and as you say, there's a lot of ways, and a lot of the times it's for example, the BIOS of your machine. It probably went through a software supply chain in and by itself, because there was the motherboard manufacturer took some code from probably a recommendation from the chipset manufacturer, and then they essentially repackaged everything together and made it work for their
from
motherboard.
multiple chips, right? They take code from like reference code. I actually just talked to the person at Intel who's done this for a long time, and they take reference code from Intel, but they all go through. You're exactly right, Santiago. They all go through a different path of customization because of other hardware, other dependencies. Yep.
Yeah, it is crazy when you look at the motherboard in the machine that I'm right now. It has a full-fledged USB stack at the BIOS level, and you can fuss that. And I'm sure there's some very, very nasty stuff in there. So I don't even like at that like single point level. I'm sure there's something scary in there. And then to think about software supply chain compromises, then I can only imagine how bad it can really get. And as you said, some of these like firmware low level cases are very, very hard to fix. I don't know if you recall I think it was in the Nintendo Switch that there was like a route through the USB port that was essentially unfixable because you couldn't get a fix to that part of the flash.
Yeah, I definitely, I don't remember that one specifically, but it's kind of scary to think that sometimes even the OEM, the manufacturer, can't fix things. I mean, oftentimes they can. Like with UEFI, yes. I mean, with hardware limitations in place that are the ultimate kind of guardrails. Everything else in between, they conceivably could fix, provided the hardware they have supports it. You can't fix that as a user a lot of times because like there has to be multiple points in the code. So like you can't just go like make a configuration change because there has to be code like an SMM that checks the SMRAM that checks that, right? So it has to be an SMI handler that goes and checks for that certain thing. If that's not in the code, you can't update it yourself. You got to get it from the OEM. But you're right. There's also like hardware limitations. Like that part of the hardware just doesn't. We didn't order the chip that had that feature, so we can't fix it, which is scary.
It's scary. Some of the research that we do in my lab is we buy IoT devices. We try to desolder the flash, and then we try to dump the flash. And it's funny how you can actually find, I don't know, a Linux kernel version 3 point something with a bunch of CVEs on it, and I don't know, and netcat process listening in, just like blindly piping stuff into a file for some reason. I don't know. I think that particular space gets a little bit scary just because it hasn't been as exposed as other systems like the cloud. Everybody's been hitting the cloud for the last decade, but I don't know, home IoT devices or even routers are actually just catching up with this sort of a trend in software supply chain attacks.
Are they even catching up?
Do you think they'll ever actually catch up to that, though, given the consumerism and consumers wanting a product with the maximum amount of features for the lowest possible price, and profits from a capitalist side trying to make as much money and sell as many products with a short lifespan to make more money because they sell more products? So can we actually solve that from a vulnerability and a software supply chain risk issue unless we put an expiration on things from a consumer side? And then you end up with a whole nother problem that consumers come against with right to fix and right to repair stuff.
I think that's a great question. I think it boils down to the SBOM problem, but also all of the other things that we actually need to think at a supply chain level. To give you an example, you buy a bottle of pills, right? An SBOM or a BOM would essentially be the list of things that it has, right? It says it has this ingredients, it has this it has this active ingredients. It may also say things like, oh, it was manufactured in a factory that was also manufacturing this other chemical, so if you have allergies, be careful with that. But we also need to think about aspects like, does this have an FDA approval seal? Does this have an ISO certification because it's a high assurance device? And that should also be somewhat of a requirement, especially when you're acquiring a piece of IoT. It should have other things like is there any sort of information that I don't need to ship to the consumer for them to verify manually, but something that I need to give to a government regulator so that they can make determinations whether this is fit for consumption or not. And I think that's all the sort of stories that we need to start supporting, not necessarily within an SBOM, but within essentially a software supply chain ecosystem.
Santiago, in Toto claims to be a framework to secure the integrity of the software supply chains. That's a project you're involved in?
Yep, that's a project that I started doing my PhD. The way to picture it is, imagine that every single time you did something with software that changed or gave any sort of a determination about software, like either you look at it and you say it's good or bad, or either you take something like source code and you build a binary, you create a little certification saying that you did what you did. It's a little bit similar to SBOMs, that once you have enough certifications, you can actually take a look at the software and say, well, do I trust this? It's a little bit more expressive than SBOMs in that you can actually say, well, what tools did you use to make an SBOM? When did you generate the SBOM? Based on what information did you generate the SBOM? You can attach other things like SALSA, the security levels for software artifacts. It's actually by default wrapped in an in-toto wrapper. You can, for example, do a vulnerability scan, spit out the results, sign that, and then attach it to the software artifact. And the goal of that is to essentially provide this sort of like high-level visibility. What is going on? Who did what? And what do they say?
Yeah, that's awesome, because I think it solves some of my SBOM kind of concerns, where you've just got this JSON blob that says, yes, this is what makes up the software, and like maybe we sign it, maybe we don't. But what was your process for signing it, and how do I know when it changes and if that change was authorized? Right.
So it's funny you mentioned I'm actually running the same SBOM tool, well, a different SBOM tool on the same thing. I take the top 5 SBOM tools. I run them on the same thing. And then I try to look at whether they come to the same conclusion, and it's unsurprising that they don't. The metaphor that I'd like to think of is, instead of thinking of the ingredients we use to make something, to make the SBOM and produce the SBOM as we're making the something, which is how it happens in the physical supply chain. Right now, we just build the thing, and then we give it to a tool, and we say, hey, figure out what I did, and then spit out something like an SBOM so I essentially comply with, executive order or whatever, which I think that's again missing the point. We need these SBOM things, and they need to be accurate, and we need to rethink the processes that we're carrying out so that the information in the SBOM is actually trustworthy.
Yeah, agreed. It's a way to separate the good from the bad of the ingredients. I mean, that's part. I mean, having the ingredients is one thing. Knowing if the ingredients are really what they say they are is another level of validation. It sounds like in-toto's more kind of in tune with.
Yeah, I don't see them as competing though. I think you can use both, and I do see a world in the near future in which you can use in-toto to sign SBOMs, in-toto to provide more context about an SBOM, and these two techniques together, then you can determine whether you really trust the SBOM or somebody's just trying to, slap a label on something and then go on with their day.
Right. Tell us, we've talked a little bit about SigStore, and I'm still not 100% clear how it works and I understand how it helps. I understand like the goal, that it's basically an easy way, easy in air quotes maybe, way for developers to sign their code and say, yes, this is the code. I was the developer and this was my code. Is that accurate?
Yeah. So SigStore actually ties everything together very nicely, in that it's a way to discover software signatures in a transparency log, and also generate one single-use signatures for something without actually having to manage the keys. The way that it works is you essentially generate your public-private keys for one use, and then you convince an identity provider that you are who you claim to be. Yep. It can be GitHub, it can be Google, What this identity provider will give you is essentially a token that then you can exchange at Sigstore to get your very short-lived certificate. It lives for 30 minutes. I think it's the window that's configured right now. So then you sign something and then you stick it on the transparency log. Now you know when the signature was made. You can get rid of the cryptographic material. You don't need to keep the private key anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And then verifiers can verify the signature based on your identity. You can say, well, this is this developer from GitHub. It's signing a Git tag, and they signed it at this point in time using their identity.
That's really amazing because there's a lot under the covers there to make that happen in an automated fashion, right? It's a great service for developers that, like you said, don't, because we would just screw it up. Like if I were trying to say, I would guarantee the first time I would screw it up. I'm trying to do all that myself.
It is amazing. And it's of course the work of dozens, if not hundreds of people working tirelessly in this. This is the beauty of open source. But you see it, that there's companies actually adopting this as part of their security strategy because, as you say, one of the biggest pain points that we have is managing these things, right? Somebody loses a private key, it gets, I don't know. I think Windows Driver had that issue, right? Somebody stole a signing certificate for a large.
Oh yeah, I know people that collect those.
So yeah, you don't want to be losing these things, right?
Yes, that would be bad. Tell me a little bit. Go ahead, Mandy.
I would say back on Sigstore. So Santiago, my understanding is that even though there's kind of 6 main parts to it, they can each be used individually if they don't want to use the entire suite of what comprises Sigstore.
Yes. There's essentially 2 components. There's Recore, which is the signature transparency log. In theory, you're allowed to.
Yeah. Will you talk more about Recore? Because that's the part that I was most interested in, and also want to know why using it, like what are situations where it would be used standalone?
So, for example, you could deploy Recore locally inside of your company as just a signature transparency log for software. Spoilers, you can actually submit in Toto attestations to it. It supports in Toto natively. So what you can do is you can say, every developer in my company will be signing every single operation they do into the log, and I will use my own root of trust, and I will issue them keys if that's what you desire. To give you an example, Datadog uses in Toto, and what they do is they hand each of their developers an HSM, a little YubiKey that they use to sign things. So you can do things like that in which you manage the root of trust yourself. You can deploy the signature transparency log internally, and you can use that to provide very highly granular operational and cryptographically signed provenance information for your software development lifecycle.
Okay, and just for the listeners, the Recore, the synopsis of it is a built-in transparency and timestamping service that records signed metadata to a ledger that can be searched but can't be tampered with. And that's just one of the 6 parts of Sigstore.
Yeah, wait, so I think that's, you mean like blockchain?
It is. So the way that I describe to my students blockchain or a transparency log is, in a blockchain you need to ask for permission to write, and then you spend a lot of time asking for permission. And in a transparency log you ask for forgiveness for what you wrote. But very similar, yeah.
Santiago, this is very self-serving for me as I use Manjaro as my Linux desktop. I'm obligated as a Linux desktop user to tell you that I use Linux and which distribution. It's in that unwritten
It's kind of like CrossFit, right?
Yes, CrossFit, vegan. I'll have to disclose that. Tell us about the Arch Linux security team. I want to know a little bit about the packaging mechanism specifically, because what I've discovered is it's unique. It's not compiling everything from source in Gen 2, but it's not a .deb format or the Red Hat variant, right? It's RPM. It's somewhere like in between. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, I would say it's fair. The philosophy behind it is you you have the sort of pre-built binary experience, but it's also very friendly to almost the Gentoo experience, if that's what you want to do. The goal is for you to be able to control the system to a way more granularity than, say, a Debian or an Ubuntu or an RPM. The build scripts are very exposed to users, and there's the AUR, of course, that then you can use to build your own stuff.
That's the Arch user repository. That's different from the official repository, which now I love because I can find pretty much any piece of software. Like, I don't think I've really found a piece of software that I needed that wasn't in the official Arch repositories, or especially in the user one, which is amazing.
It is pretty cool. I used to be a Debian guy myself, and I don't know. I installed an NVIDIA driver and I killed my computer for like the 6th time.
That should be a t-shirt. I think if you're a Linux desktop, you should I installed an NVIDIA driver and killed my system is like a badge of honor.
and that sounds like Debian, right?
That's any version of Linux. Okay, let's just put that out there.
I mean, and back then I just didn't understand what happened. I was like, I thought some smart people were behind this whole thing, but it's just like nobody knows. Like, somebody writes some shell script that spits a binary, then some tries to guess some X11 config, and then you try to boot X11, and of course it's not the version that they wrote the shell script for, and then it's all a mess. In Arch Linux, the NVIDIA drivers are way better. They're actually tied to the kernel version, so there's a lot of more due diligence there. And then that's why I switched. I
like the control, though, and I think this speaks to a security thing too. I can control which Linux kernel version I'm on, and stuff is tied to that, and I have control over that, and I think that allows me to better control the security of my system as well. As the Linux kernel advances, I get better security, and I feel like there's a tipping point. Once you kind of push that kernel version a little too far, you start running into stability issues, and you can back it out and go back and be in a safe place.
Yeah, that's the thing. I think it does have a learning curve that you go like, why am I like having issues with, I don't know, Chromium beta not being detected by Netflix, which happened to me. It happened. I thought it was so new that I thought it was old.
Yeah, but the thing with that is the reason why I use Manjaro in its Arch, it's essentially Arch Linux with a little more testing, right, and some training wheels, right? But under the covers, it has the same package managers. But I find that if I had a problem previously, like an Ubuntu or Debian with Chrome, I'd be like, wait, how did I install Chrome? Did I install the Deb from Google, or did I get it from Flatpak, or did I get it from Snap? And if I got it from Flatpak or Snap, which version did I install? I like the Arch base because I still have the same options, but it's way more updated and way more tied to that release, which is really nice.
Yeah, I mean, speaking of supply chain, something that also used to piss me off a lot on Debian was if you wanted to install something a little bit out there, I think even for Discord, it happens that it says like, oh, download my signing key and put it like apt ppa add something. Yeah. And then you're like, wait a second. You're telling me that I just ultimately trust you now for signing stuff? Or
well, you don't trust them, you trust their key and whoever holds that key, right? That's the issue.
Right. I think the model in Arch Linux is a little bit more separated. It's not very explicit for users, for example, but there's a separation between core packages, say the Linux kernel, glibc, all of this sort of like very critical things. Not everybody's able to write to those repositories. And then there's the extra, which is like all cool things. And then there's the community repository, which is still maintained by Arch Linux community members. And then there's the community repository, which that's the division, right? That's the Derby Dragons angle.
And how in Arch Linux, because now Flatpak is talking, FlatHub is talking about potentially commercialization and giving us a reassurance that they don't necessarily say validate the supply chain. They say give packagers security tools, which I think are two different things. So how does Arch ensure that someone's not putting something malicious in a package? So
in the AUR, it's a little bit like anything goes. Really,
Wild West,
it's
yeah.
almost like GitHub.
Yeah.
In the repositories, like the maintainer repositories, there's a lot of due diligence from community members and whatnot. The security team spends a lot of time looking at both vulnerabilities that are not like applied to the packages we maintain, and trying to understand whether they actually translate to the things we're packaging. We spent quite a bit of time trying to reproduce bugs. For example, if somebody says, I don't know, there's a vulnerability on the Linux kernel and I don't know, on the SCSI driver and whatnot, we tried to understand whether that driver is even built, whether it would be loaded by any sort of like rules, and whether we offer it to users on all the lines, right? So we spend a lot of time, and that's part of the fun of being on the security team, which is, can I try to exploit the packages as they're being announced, and then fix them or help the maintainers of that package fix them.
But also, I think Arch has an advantage that being a rolling release, you're constantly pushing out the latest software. And this is a philosophy that I get behind. It's how I try and build my software, right? I build my containers, my environments, always update to the latest version. And I tried to build my Linux systems that way. But like with Ubuntu or Debian, I'm like, you're still using old stuff, and maybe you're backporting a fix, which we can talk about in a moment, why that's probably a bad idea, right? But I feel like security-wise, you're in a better shape with Arch because you're getting the latest versions. And also, I like it as a desktop user, getting the latest features. Like that update to the latest version of GNOME and Mutter and Wayland, I was like, wow. I'm like, you guys made all that work together, which is just, I'm like, I'm glad I didn't have to do that.
It's actually even better as a maintainer, because something that happens in, say, all of these other distros is they find a vulnerability, they can't update to a new version, they need to find a patch and then apply it themselves and then figure out that whether it breaks something. And that's way more finicky, right? It actually puts a lot of burden on the maintainer to make sure they're not shooting themselves in the foot. Yeah,
and did that backported patch, did it actually work is one thing. And you hope they're doing the same level of testing that you said you're doing in the Arch project, right? It's actually seeing if the vulnerability exists. But did they introduce a new vulnerability or a new kind of scenario where a new vulnerability presents itself by backporting that fix and not upgrading all the code that goes along with it to support it?
Yeah, that was a mouthful, but yeah, that's the problem.
That's a huge, yes. Yes. With containers, which is interesting, I'm trying to build containers vulnerable on purpose, which turns out sometimes be really hard. Well, I shouldn't say build containers vulnerable, build in a container vulnerable version of software, which means you have to use older software. So one of my hacks is I just use Debian. It's got old stuff in it, and all the older vulnerable stuff compiles against it, which is great. Like I actually use that to my advantage. But does Arch doesn't have like a container? Does Arch have a container version of itself, and how is that? I haven't used it yet.
Yeah, actually, that's a project that I and a couple of people in the community started, and now it's a very popular container. It's very well maintained. The only issue that it has is if you, for example, use it as a builder on GitHub Actions or something like that, the user land libraries assume that there's a newer kernel, and every now and then it's just missing a system call. Like you start getting a couple of system calls from the host kernel.
Because Arch likes to run on more modern Linux kernels, which is one of the reasons why I like it, actually.
Right.
That's really cool. So my goal is to try and convince more people to get on the Arch bandwagon. I think it doesn't get the respect it deserves.
Yeah, I try to evangelize in my classroom, but it's just a little hard to be unbiased about it. It's really nice.
It's awesome. More questions for Santiago?
Five questions. Oh no, Mandy, go ahead.
First, I want to say on In Toto, love the name. I think it's a really great name. But I have a question separating a little bit from the SBOM information, which is fantastic. But in reading some of your documentation, came across the poly password hasher. And I am very curious on this. Like, first off, in your introduction, there are 2 paragraphs of it that I find absolutely fantastic and fascinating. Maybe you could explain a little bit to the listeners, and then I'm really curious to know, like, how much has it been used or what has happened with it since you started the poly password hasher.
Yeah, so that was another project from my PhD. The fundamental idea is when you're trying to crack passwords on a database, you essentially start hitting the same hash, or you're strategic about it. You're trying to find the weakest password on the database first, right? Back in the day, I don't know if this is still the case, but let me in was almost 1% of the passwords in a database, right? So that was a very good strategy to start like cracking the whole database. The goal of polypassword hasher was to try to link passwords together. Imagine a padlock in that you have 3 dials. In theory, you shouldn't be able to guess one dial individually, right? You need to guess the 3 dials in order to break the padlock. So what we did is we tried to come up with a password hashing mechanism in which you encrypt the whole database, and you can only decrypt the whole database if you know enough correct passwords, say 10 out of the whole database. What this causes is that it creates an exponential cost for hackers to crack the database. For a server, it's actually very, very trivial. When you boot, you wait a couple of seconds, you get a couple of correct passwords from legitimate users, and then you're able to recover the whole decryption key. For password crackers, though, the amount of effort that they need to invest to guess 3 passwords correctly of the whole database, or say 10 passwords correctly, is way, way, way harder. In terms of usage, we collaborated with National Geographic for a little bit. It was one of those collaborations in which we couldn't really tell if it was fully used, but I mean, it depends. As an academic, sometimes you cannot walk into their like data center and go like, is this really there? So yeah, but I would love for it to see a little bit more uptake. I think part of the challenge as well is whether we are going to have passwords for the foreseeable future. I'm starting to see people trying to go, I don't know, WebAuthn and all of these other technologies that it just, I don't know, maybe it's time to let passwords die.
Well, I recommend that people read your white paper on it because it is very interesting. So I feel like there's got to be people out there who would use it, appreciate it, and be able to add to it.
Thank you. We actually have a PAM security module. If you're into that, you can actually just plug it into PAM. If you have a multi-user system, say it actually encrypts your Etsy shadow, and you're pretty good shape.
Nice. Santiago, I just have 5 questions left for you. Are you ready to play 5 questions with Security Weekly?
Let's go.
3 words to describe yourself.
You got me there? Oh, that's 4. Damn it.
We'll give you a buy on that one.
I could try another one.
Sure. They can all be separate words.
You can hyphenate.
7 words.
You can hyphenate.
Stubborn security person.
All right.
If you were a serial killer, what would be your weapon of choice?
I would like to have something that's like very identifiable, maybe something like a frozen parrot or something like that.
Frozen parrot?
There you go. That's
So
the first
wow.
time.
it gives you the name, right?
The frozen parrot serial killer. I love it.
Frozen parrot killer.
I love it. If you were to write a book about yourself, what would the title be?
The Frozen Parrot Killer. I'm kidding.
It would be something like a mistakes, or something like that.
What is your favorite hacker movie?
I actually can I cheat a little? I think my favorite hacker media was Snow Crash, but I don't think there was a movie about it.
Not yet.
No.
Is there going to be one?
There's
Well,
my
a
understanding
lot of-
that the options were signed to produce said movie. Yes.
Whether it actually gets made is
Right, that's a different
it's
story.
often disappointing because they say that about a lot of books that we probably collectively love.
Mm-hmm.
They're working on a script and there's been and you never see it. Hopefully it gets through though.
Yep.
That's awesome.
That reminds me. I need to read that again.
Yes. It's a good reminder.
Yep.
Santiago, choose 2 celebrities to be your parents.
Alive, dead, fictional, or otherwise.
Wow, I'm really bad at this game.
There's no right or wrong answer. Or time limit, really.
And you're really good at it. So
Yeah, you're doing great so far.
You're doing great.
It doesn't have to be a celebrity. It can really be anyone from history, fictional, or not.
yep. And it all depends on how you define celebrity. I mean, could be a celebrity in your own
Celebrity
mind.
to you, right?
Right.
Huh. I don't even know. What would be the benefit of? Okay, 2 Smurfs. I don't know.
Which
I
two?
love it. Oh, which two,
Which
though?
two? Which
Yeah.
two? I mean, it is
Now you're
2023.
driving down a-
It's 2023, so everything is on the table here, right?
That's right. Doesn't matter. Any
Okay,
two.
two Smurfs. The one that laughs and the one that's angry.
Grumpy and happy. Grumpy and happy.
Sure.
I don't know.
Wait,
I'm
aren't
rusty.
those dwarfs?
I'm
That's
rusty
not
on my Smurfs. I'm rusty on my Smurfs. No,
Yeah.
wait. Those are the
That's a-
7
that's a-
dwarfs.
That's a Smurf
no,
too.
those
Rusty.
are those are 7 dwarfs, not Smurfs.
No, Rusty's a Smurf.
Rusty's a Smurf?
Yeah, he's red.
Oh, yeah.
He's that dark brown. No, I'm kidding. I don't know.
I only remember, isn't there's Smurfette and Doc, maybe? Or is that also a
There's hundreds.
No, there's
of
a
them.
Smurfette.
There's hundreds.
There's definitely
of them.
a Smurfette.
So there could definitely be a happy and an angry. There's definitely an angry Smurf.
I like that we've never debated Smurfs on the show before, Santiago, and you got us doing that. So that was great. I'm not sure if that was on purpose, but you hacked us.
I don't consider myself a Smurf enthusiast by any means. I don't know why it came to mind.
It's amazing.
That's awesome.
Santiago, thank you so much for appearing on this edition of Pulse Security Weekly.
Thank you. It was my pleasure.
Coming up next, the security news. How to steal a Tesla. Coming up next.
Hi, folks. I'm Adrian Sanabria, the host of Enterprise Security Weekly. Every week, we interview the most interesting folks we can find talking about the most pressing cybersecurity issues and challenges facing the enterprise today. Myself and my co-hosts have each been in the industry for decades, long enough to see the patterns in the industry and explore where trends are going. In addition to enterprise challenges, we also follow the vendor space, the most interesting security startups emerging, technology and product trends, all of the most interesting funding and acquisition announcements. Finally, we love to discuss the latest trends in tech and how they'll impact cybersecurity. If you're wondering how the latest in AI, quantum computing, cloud, and DevOps is going to impact security a few years down the road, you should follow the Enterprise Security Weekly podcast.
Welcome back, everyone, to Paul's Security Weekly. Quick announcement, Identiverse 2023 is heading to Las Vegas. Join the digital identity community at the Aria Resort and Casino in Las Vegas, May 30th to June 2nd. Identiverse is a must-attend annual event that brings together over 2,500 security professionals for 4 days of world-class learning, engagement, and entertainment. As a community member, you're able to receive 20% off your Identiverse 2023 tickets by using the code ISV23-SW20 and registering at securityweekly.com/Identiverse 2023.
It's a big mouthful.
It's a lot to say. Let's see. Let's talk about stealing a Tesla by accident.
By accident.
No, this legit was by accident. So here's the scenario. There's two white Tesla Model 3s in the parking lot, as we say in Rhode Island, side by each.
Side by each, yep.
Side by each. That means they're next to each other, for those that don't speak Rhode Island. And you're coming out of the store or wherever you're coming out of, and you use your phone, and you unlock your Tesla, and you get in, and you start driving. And while you're driving, you're kind of puzzled that the charging cable you have in your car is missing. And you're kind of puzzled that when you go to call someone that it's not your contacts in the car. And then you get a phone call from a stranger that says, hey, I think you're in my Tesla. And you stop the car and you get out and you realize that it has different wheels and tires than you have on your Tesla. And so you drive back to where you were. Now, I don't know. In the story, it said they called the police. I don't know why you would. I don't, if they did it as a joke, maybe. I don't. Or if he called before they figured out what happened and the police just kind of laughed. But it turns out this person's, the phone unlocked the wrong Tesla or both Teslas. Like, there's not a lot of like, I have so many questions because there's not a lot of details here. Like, I don't know, did both of them unlock? Could the other person that was in the parking lot unlock that person's phone? I mean, they said that the other person did find the air quotes not thief cell phone number to be able to call them inside the car. So did it unlock both of them, or did the other person's app unlock the other guy's Tesla that was still in the parking lot? Also, there's no information as to how this happened. I don't know how it happened.
Well, they can't get any because Tesla won't talk.
Yeah. So Tesla says, the article says Elon dissolved the company's PR team years ago. Who needs a PR team? Whatever.
Yes, because they're running too many microservices, right?
I mean, Tesla's it's like the new kind of like, it's like those scooters that you see in a lot of cities where you can just go up and get a scooter. Teslas are now the same thing. Like, but whichever Tesla looks great, I'll just take that one.
Well, I think Tesla does have bug bounties, so this strongly suggests you should take a good look at that app and find out what it's using for a cookie or whatever it is. There must be something seriously wrong with it.
Yeah, I would love the technical details of how this happened.
Yep. I was going to say maybe it was a complete coincidence, but sorry, Maddie.
The author of this doesn't have very much confidence in their bug bounty program, since the very end of the article is the company does have an online mailbox to report vulnerabilities. If someone ever does get through to Tesla, the company might be able to take measures.
Wow. Shots fired.
Yeah.
Yeah, getting Elon to pay a bug bounty would probably not be much use because he won't pay the rent or his server fees or anything.
Hey, I found someone who reported a bug. You're fired. Shit.
That's right. That's more likely.
Right? Oh boy. So I don't know. We don't. I want more details here. I want to. Is this a? Tesla just needs to send Larry and I both a car so we can test this.
Yep. Two identical white Model 3s.
Model S's.
Plaid. Great minds think alike.
That's right.
Yep.
With the fancy, I want the fancy steering wheel. I want the spaceship steering
Just
wheel.
don't care. Just send me. I will not look a gift horse in the mouth.
Yeah, that's true.
Or
that's
a gifted Tesla in the steering
wheel. I guess
wheel.
if it has to be a regular round steering wheel, okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Tyler,
It's gotta be periwinkle blue. Periwinkle blue.
that's to be red.
Again, won't look a gift horse in the mouth. Right.
Mm.
I also won't look a free lease in the mouth either. Like, just, yeah.
It costs a lot to lease a. It's $1,300 a month.
It's insanity.
To lease a well, the one, I mean, even like a base Model S. I was just looking at it.
Yeah.
Because Dave Kennedy posted that he was leasing a Tesla on Twitter. He said it was
how easy.
Yeah, and he said it was a
really
great experience.
Crazy.
And I'm like, I don't know if I want that bill to come every month.
I know I don't want that bill to come every month.
I mean, but I don't know if I want a Tesla either. I think there's other options out there.
Like I don't want that bill because like literally we've had our cars paid off for years. Like,
yeah, there's that for sure. Something you said for not having a car payment. Also, there's the fact that someone else could just unlock it and start it and drive away.
I mean, there's that. I
don't know if this is
but
all
you're
models.
inadvertently a ride-sharing company. You're inadvertently became a rental agency.
Yeah, as long as they're helping me pay my $1,300 a month lease, I'm good with that.
Yeah, you had inadvertently listed your car on Turo.
Right. All right, what next? That was one of the more fun ones that I had. Oh, let's talk about vulnerabilities. Good Lord.
Let's talk about, yeah.
Have you seen this thing?
Which one?
My story number 8.
Your story number 8.
It's an AkuVox.
This one feels familiar.
And AkuVox, I'm going to say AkuVox. Everyone good with that? AkuVox E11 door phone / intercom is what they're calling. I mean, it looks really cool.
It feels like we talked about this one last week, but I could be wrong.
This was published on March 9th.
So not possible.
Okay. I mean, unless you picked it up from somewhere else. This is a Dan Gooden article on Ars Technica.
It feels familiar. Either that or I did read this somewhere. And
yeah. So AkuVox has some heinous vulnerabilities. So what researchers from Clarity found is that, well, they found 13 vulnerabilities, and all of which are pretty heinous. First of all, they use FTP to transfer images and video. FTP and view download images sent by other customers. So unencrypted FTP. Not too often we say unencrypted FTP in the context of a new device that you're buying. Also, there was an authentication bypass in the web interface, which is, I mean, I was rooting for authentication bypass. Like I had a really good feeling if we were playing like some kind of game, my money would be on authentication bypass in the web interface, like for sure. I don't think I would have guessed the SIP vulnerability. So they found that the SIP server doesn't check if the Smart Plus user is authorized to connect to a specific E11. E11's the device. As a result, anyone with the app installed can connect to any E11 that's connected to the internet. I'm sorry, even when it's behind the NAT firewall.
What?
Then they can view.
What?
Then view and listen to video and audio in real time.
What?
And I hope be able to talk to that one. Be like, hey, is anyone
UPnP strike?
I'm like, just saying hi. I'm like, hey. That's
why. So the only reason that this should be directly exposed to the internet and you can do this even with NAT means that UPnP had punched through and did a direct exposed port. Like that's stupid on all fronts. This is all stupid, but this is
either that or it's checking for a message on the like it's making an outbound connection and constantly checking to see if someone's calling it, and if it's calling it, they do the like reverse kind of connection. It's a reverse connection.
Now, I think you guys are misunderstanding this. This is a feature, not a bug.
Yeah.
It creates security. Now, a lot of people are looking at your security camera, right? All kinds of strangers. So if anything happens, a lot of people will notice it. You should have to pay extra for this.
Yeah, like I want someone to come over and be like, Paul, tonight's trash night. I haven't seen you take out the trash yet. Please don't forget to do that.
See? People could enhance your life.
Yeah.
Crowdsourced out security monitoring. I like it.
Yeah.
Now, the manufacturer claims that so Clarity tried to report these vulnerabilities and got silence from the manufacturer and then published their results. The manufacturer said, well, what do we call this? God bless you. AccuVox, thank you, says that it went to like an inbox they weren't checking. Like,
no, it went to spam.
It went to spam.
Yeah, even better. The third-party ticket system somehow failed to receive the messages, and the emails happened to land in the spam folder.
The disk was full in our ticketing system. Therefore, we didn't get any new tickets.
Because we are so
We thought we were
vulnerable.
awesome in support. It just turns out the disk was full in our support server.
We received so many emails about vulnerabilities that our email box became full.
But then they say, we would also like to ask you to kindly remove the part about how to hack into the device from the article so we can minimize the risk of exploitation of these vulnerabilities by real hackers as opposed to fake hackers.
Blink.
Wait, so they don't fix this. They just want us to know how to do this, so you don't do it.
Well, they say they're gonna fix it. They say because the E11 has entered into the end of life phase, we gave much lower priority to its firmware upgrade, which is an explanation of how they ended up in the situation in the first place, which is basically like bad decisions that led to the design and implementation of the firmware, and then further bad decisions that led to end of lifing this device with said vulnerabilities. And then they say they're going to concentrate all possible resources to patch the security holes within the shortest possible time frame. I'm not sure what all possible resources could be. An hour a week from Dave.
Well, no,
that's all that's possible.
They're just going to use. They're only going to use the real developers.
No, it's
to prevent real hackers,
as opposed to the real.
As soon as Vlad gets back from the war, he'll take care of this.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Sam, you had a comment there?
No, just like Raiders of the Lost Ark, they're putting top men on it.
Yes.
We've got our best man on it. I just watched that movie with my son too. It's funny you say that.
That's awesome.
It's a great movie.
I'm having deja vu on this one because like I feel like I either read this, we covered it on the show. I specifically remember the image in the article about Bob's and Eve's SIP account with the crocheted penguin being held up. Like,
why can't you just revoke Eve's network access? We'd all be more secure.
I know.
Now I kind of, to Sam's point though, I kind of want one of these devices now, and I want to put it on its own internet, completely separate from everything. Like, just get something with a Google Fi SIM card on it, connect it into that, and like just see what happens.
Put it in the bathroom.
Yeah,
just see who wants to chat.
Like, just put it in my workout room, and I'll just work out every morning like 80s leotards, and that's what I'm going to stream. If you want to watch that, I mean, all the more power to you. I guarantee you won't want to watch for very long.
Honestly, I kind of want to just use one of these as a back door and put this somewhere else so that I can always get back into it.
Yeah.
Right? This is the new drop device. And people would think it's cool. Like, these things are cool looking, by the way.
I know.
They look really, it's like very futuristic. It looks like basically a tablet, a large phone or small tablet.
Yep. And they have RFID built in.
Nice.
Put this right outside the janitor's door in IT department, the closet, and make it look like the closet's very secure, but now you can hear everything in IT.
Yep. I only see 3 of them available on eBay right now. They're they're roughly the $200 range with nearly $50 shipping from Germany on all 3 of them.
Gotcha.
Yep. A little outside of my budget for something like that.
So it's worth it.
But they're end of life, so they'll be on the market soon.
Mm-hmm.
As long as you can get the one without the updated firmware on it. Shouldn't be hard.
You mentioned.
Well, I've got a couple more Dan Gooden stories. While you're on the topic, if you look at,
I wanted to talk about Brazil seizing the Flipper Zero shipments, Sam.
okay,
I before you get to, I have a Flipper Zero story. So I'm in the American Dream Mall in New Jersey. I went on vacation to New Jersey. It's the second largest mall in America, and it has indoor skiing and an indoor water park, all in the same thing, and like a lot of other stuff, like hundreds of thousands of square feet of mall and shopping, and it's pretty amazing, and it's in New Jersey. And so it also has a Mr. Beast burger bar. I don't know if you follow Mr. Beast, like he created his own burger chain, which is pretty cool.
Burgers are all Ghost Kitchen, right?
Yeah, the burgers are pretty good actually. And so I'm in Mr. Beast with my kids, and I see this kid's got to be about 9 or 10 years old, and he's got a Flipper Zero, and he's pointing at the giant TV in the Mr. Beast restaurant.
Was Boris Federlich there by chance?
No, it wasn't Boris'
Gabe?
kid. No, this was a different kid. And like I look over, and I'm like, I can't help myself. I'm like, hey, you. I'm like, quit trying to hack that TV with your Flipper Zero. And the kid looks at me like, how the hell does this old guy know what this Flipper Zero is? And the look on his face, I'm dying. And my kids are laughing too, because they're like, oh, like Dad showed us how to use the Flipper Zero, like, and they're just dying laughing at the kid's reaction too.
Yeah.
So then he's sitting with his friend or cousin or brother or something, right, on the eating burgers. And
where were their parents?
Yeah, I don't know where their parents were. Right?
Yeah.
Parents were nowhere to be found. But I'm like, I love this kid already because he's trying to hack a TV with a Flipper Zero. But I'm like, he needs some guidance. I'm like, so like, don't cause too much harm with this. Like, hacking's not about causing harm. I'm like, however, if you want more RFID or infrared stuff on there and cooler stuff, I'm like, you got to check out the Unleashed firmware. And his friend pulls out a Flipper Zero from his pocket with this big smile on his face. He's like, how do I install that? I'm like, when you use the Flipper Zero thing, I'm like, you go find your Unleashed. It's on GitHub. You Google search for it. I'm like, use the Flipper Zero thing to flash Unleashed. I'm like, it's got way more tools on it. And they were like their eyes lit up. And like, so like somewhere in the world,
somewhere you became
maybe in New Jersey, I don't know. Yeah, these kids are trying to put Unleashed on their Flipper Zeros because of the old guy in Mr. Beast.
And some old guy in Mr. Beast burger joint is their new hero.
Right.
I mean, there was 2 of them there. I would have offered him a couple $100 for both those.
Yeah, this much is true. Back to the story, right? I'm like, hey kids, can I buy you? I'll pay for your meal and give you like $100 each if you give me your Flipper Zeros. So Sam, now Brazil is seizing Flipper Zeros.
well, they're not letting them be delivered because they don't pass their equivalent of the FCC radio test. You know, they're just like here. You have to have a device certified that it isn't going to interfere with radio, and they've declared it a criminal tool. So if you try to ship it, it'll be impounded and sent back. You remember about a couple of weeks ago, they froze $3 million, or froze a whole shipment of Flipper Zeros getting in from the manufacturer. A lot of people are freaking out over these things.
Which is like, I mean, you know, my whole take on this is and we've talked about this on the show in the context of firmware and such and medical devices, right? But you can get a hammer and you can use it to build amazing things. You can build homes for people who don't have homes with a hammer, or you can bash people over the head with the hammer.
Right.
And I feel like Flipper Zero is kind of a similar kind of thing, which hence my wandering around the country and warning the youth of America to have ethics and morals when they use, you know, their hacking tools. I feel like I've made a very small impact, but hopefully we, all of us on the show and listening, encouraged, you know, the youths of America to hack responsibly. Which is hard with a Flipper Zero because you can cause a lot of shenanigans with the Flipper Zero. Like we talked about Tesla at the top of the segment, and you can pop the charging port open on the Tesla, which is highly annoying to Tesla owners, but highly entertaining to the Flipper Zero owners.
Yep. Now this goes back to like, you know, what we saw with the German anti-hacking laws back in the day, you know, where, you know, hacking tools were considered criminal because they could be used for hacking stuff.
Right.
When you also have a need for those tools to perform legitimate penetration testing to evaluate the security of various things, which is not criminalized. And they eventually revised their anti-hacking laws to include the method, the concept of intent. So they're illegal, but if you're intending to use them for purposes of good, they're okay. Brazil could conceivably do something like this.
Right. But also, I mean, if out of the box it violates the equivalent of FCC, that also like means nothing. So
Right.
If you, our friend Bob, were to put like the Unleashed firmware on it, you may or may not be able to use the radios on it to transmit at frequencies that are not approved by the FCC here in the US, and you should not you should not do that.
Yeah, I'm sure you could wiretap and probably interfere with radio signals with the thing. They're not wrong about that.
It's true. You want to be careful with some of those modules in the firmware that do things with the various radios on the Flipper Zero. There's warnings on there that if you transmit at a higher power, you could damage the radios.
Sure.
Yeah, right. That, I mean, I'm sure you've seen that in other things, but on the Flipper, I've seen modules that are like, I'm like, I'm not running that on mine because these are not readily available. When are we going to be able to buy more Flipper Zeros, man? People are,
I don't know.
I mean, you can pay more money and buy them on Amazon, but
I mean, this was only supposed to be like a couple hundred of these damn devices that's turned into $1 million Kickstarter that turned into $4 million that is now just an enterprise. So like, I don't know.
I mean, good for them though.
Yeah, really cool.
Did you just drop your cigar?
Maybe this much power in the general public hands is probably should be maybe some disclaimers and some training and some efficacy things done. But we didn't have that back in the day, so everyone can just catch up.
Yeah, maybe we need to run some Flipper Zero segments too, and put some things. Like I'm like, it's cool. Like you want to turn the TV off, but like turn it back on. Like when you're done, like leave things as you found them is kind of like the old kind of hacker.
I'd say, well, don't even turn it off. Just change the channel to something that a different television station. Yeah. Like that's
you can mute it. You could mute it.
Yep. Turn on closed captioning for
right.
Yeah.
Innocuous things.
Now that you say that, huh?
What you want me to? I got.
No.
I do. Do you want me to turn on the closed captioning?
No, I've been. I've been because I haven't been able to do karate lately. But I have been going to the gym and I get on the treadmill and walk, and because my legs aren't broken, it's my neck that's broken, right? So
and now that there's TVs in there,
TVs at Planet Fitness all over the place, and god damn it, I wish there's closed captioning on half of them.
Yeah.
Huh. I'd be doing someone a service by turning on the closed captioning.
I like having the closed captioning. I was reading something that people with ADHD greatly benefit from the closed captioning.
Yep.
I'm like, that makes a lot of sense now.
Makes sense now. The even worse part is that if I'm at the gym and I'm going to try to actually run on the treadmill, got to be music.
Yeah.
But if I'm just walking at a good clip, audiobook. Yes. And closed captioning at the same time.
Right.
No.
Sam, sorry, did you have other stories you wanted to get to?
Well, sure. I mean, the other ones that I thought would be...
I want to know about number 3.
Oh, wait.
I want to know about Sam's number 3, why that was here.
Yeah, robot lawyers.
Yeah, the robot lawyer. Well, I remember this from 6 months or a year ago. This guy said, I'm your robot lawyer. Go to this website, and it'll automatically fill out forms for you to do things like contest a parking ticket and so on. And he provided this service. It became really popular. And now somebody has sued, claiming he trusted this guy, that it was going to be as good as a real lawyer. But in fact, it wasn't very good, and the forms weren't filled out right. And he's suing them on the grounds of practicing law without a license. And might have a point, depending on exactly how he described his service.
Right.
Interesting.
Yeah, it gets exactly. You're right, though, Sam. I think it depends on how the service was described and how they're going to categorize that.
There's books I've seen for sale like this, write your own will or something. You can buy a book that will totally help you prepare a legal document without a lawyer, and that's not illegal. But I think it's in how you describe it.
I think that's what we preface, like anytime we're doing anything close to discussing legal advice, we claim that we are not attorneys.
I am
not lawyers.
I am not a lawyer. Don't construe this as legal advice. I did not stay at a Holiday Inn Express last night.
That's why we can't have nice things, though. Like, how are you stupid as a general person to not understand this is a service, this is automated? Like, okay, this is not going to be a lawyer. Like, it's why we can't have nice things. Is why litigation is such an issue. Like, grow the hell up and read the fine print and understand what it does.
Yeah, but if he calls it, I'm your robot lawyer, then they've kind of got a point that they thought they were getting a real lawyer.
It's for the same reason why Buffalo Wild Wings can get sued for their boneless wings not being made of wings and being made of breast meat, and they're actually chicken nuggets.
Yeah,
come on.
They really got sued for that, right?
They are getting sued for it right now.
First world problems from stupid people. I don't know.
It should just be thrown out because they're delicious. I mean, that's...
Robot lawyers are also delicious. And
we have more delicious things to talk about. Sam, what other stories of yours you want to get to?
Yeah, the other ones I wanted to talk about were the two from Dan Gooden, 6 and 7, where, I was surprised. I'm using Google Authenticator as my second factor, and I thought it was pretty secure, and they say it's not. There's a ransomware kit for sale, or not ransomware, but a phishing kit for $300 to $1,000 that will totally break into that. Now, the part they don't explain is somehow they trick you into connecting to the wrong website. Mm-hmm. So now the attacker is in the middle, but now you give them your password, they pass it on to the server, they ask for your second factor, you give them your second factor, and they just pass it on to the server. And so they're in. So it doesn't matter that you used an authenticator app and you didn't send it over SMS. So this takes us back to the solution, which is FIDO. There was an article about it 6 months ago. I mean, FIDO is supposed to replace all this, our current two-factor solutions and your password, where you authenticate on your phone with biometrics, and then your phone tells your laptop over Bluetooth that I'm the right person and I'm here. And then the server can tell that the device at the other end of the HTTPS tunnel is really the device that is near the Bluetooth. So nobody in the middle can forge that. And this does seem to be a really good argument. They say it's the strongest possible defense against phishing, and we really should all be using it. Although I think it's only rolling out in the early stages now.
I mean, this is a similar solution to the YubiKey.
Well, I'm not so sure of that. From the sound of this, he said even hardware tokens. Well, that's right. He didn't say the YubiKey in particular. It depends on how the YubiKey works. But how would the YubiKey resist this man-in-the-middle attack?
Yeah, because the YubiKey is just generating a code.
Right. The YubiKey can't tell that it's next. Well, I mean, right now, the YubiKey cannot tell that it is next to the computer that the code is being used on.
Well, the computer doesn't check that it's plugged in via USB.
Correct.
You're just it's just basically using the copy-paste buffer to put a string in.
Doesn't the YubiKey require human interaction? You have to push the button on the YubiKey in order for that.
Yeah, but in the man-in-the-middle attack, you would do that, Tyler, right?
Yeah. Hey, here's
the code to the man in the middle who now has the code, so it doesn't save you.
Yeah.
So I think we got to look into FIDO. We really ought to be moving to FIDO because this is pretty bad. Even two-factor is not as secure as I hoped it was.
Mm.
Yeah, I mean, to that interaction, you still got to press the button on the YubiKey. Just like if I'm using the Google Authenticator, I still have to take that code from the Authenticator and type it into a computer. It's effectively the same thing.
Correct.
Right.
Yep.
But that's not making you as safe as I hoped.
They're adding a third factor with proximity, noting that the Authenticator is
That's the third factor
near the device that is entering it. But doing that query at the actual site, quote, non-interceptable type of thing, non-man-in-the-middleable.
Yeah, well, I mean, the site knows who's at the other end of the HTTPS tunnel. That's the way they can make sure there's no man in the middle. That's the idea.
Mm. That's cool.
Yeah.
Oh, I want to talk about your story number 11. I've seen stories like this over time that basically analyze. I mean, you could pretty easily write a ML algorithm that looks at how many curse words are in source code.
Yeah, and it's a lot.
It would have a field day with some of my code too.
Well, but the interesting thing here is that the people who swear more write better code, although not by.
Is that what they found? Is that what they found?
Yes. On a scale from 1 to 10 of software quality, the code with swear words in it is 0.5 better.
How did they measure better, though?
Well, they have this scale of code quality, and they don't explain it here in detail. But I would imagine, the usual stuff, errors, clumsy coding. I'm not sure. And I wonder how accurate it is. But they used thousands of samples.
Right.
So I think they worked hard to have a good measurement.
Yeah, you got a lot of data to feed it. I mean, you also have to kind of feed it the criteria for what makes up good code versus bad code, which can be somewhat subjective, but also not, right?
Yeah.
I mean, does it compile? Could be one test, right?
Well, there probably is no code out there that doesn't compile.
Well, true. Maybe. I don't know.
Anyway, the explanation they suggest is that it means people that swear more are more emotionally invested in their work. And that makes sense to me, although they didn't prove that. All they proved is that the swear words are correlated with better code.
Now I'm just going to put more swear words in my code so people think it's better.
all your variables will be enabled fuck 1, fuck 2, exactly. Shit 1.
You remember that happened to Dan Kaminsky?
Yes.
They stole passwords and dumped them at DEF CON. They were all like, fuck.yahoo, fuck.google.
Yep, I remember that.
Mm-hmm. I mean, hey, why not? There's that.
There's that.
Let's see. Do we want to talk about
sex, baby?
We can talk about.
Oh no, that's something else.
You want to talk about firmware, deploying firmware, or do you want to talk about FlatHub?
Sam, do you have to leave a little early tonight?
Nope, not till 5:30, which is 8:30 out there.
Okay, cool. Because I want to come back to one of yours for sure.
Okay.
I'd love to talk about your story number 1, Paul. Because I'm not sure whether you posted this as a troll or not.
Yeah, it was just kind of like I think the article title is interesting, and then I read the article, and it was a very high-level overview.
I would even argue maybe not all that of a good one.
Yeah. Well, it was kind of like make sure I look at these reverse engineering tools when I'm thinking about reverse engineering firmware, and it's a 10-point list of pretty much all tools that I've... Radar 2, not sure that I have used or heard of in a while. It's an open source command line reverse engineering.
You probably haven't used Hopper either.
No.
Because it's commercial.
That's commercial. Yeah, the other ones I had largely heard of.
Qling.
Yep. Qling. I think Qling framework is an open source organization. I'd not heard of that one. So that's why I flagged it. Was basically like, I didn't look at the writing or any of the other merits of the article. I was just like, that's a list that I need to make sure that I familiarize myself with every one of these frameworks.
Yeah, and I would argue, it's helpful, but I think the article was a little misleading. Reverse engineering IoT firmware, a comprehensive guide to analyzing embedded systems.
Comprehensive it is not. And it is more centered around reverse engineering than doing firmware analysis. I agree. I mean, you have to reverse engineer to analyze the firmware, but that second step of firmware analysis is more than just reverse engineering a binary. It's reverse engineering the entire system, file system, and kernel and all that.
So techniques for reverse engineering IoT firmware: disassembly, debugging, and binary patching.
Yeah.
Binary patching, I'd argue, is nothing to do with reverse engineering. It has to modify with it afterwards, which requires reverse engineering to get there.
Correct.
You don't need to do disassembly in the way that they're describing it, is the process of converting machine code into assembly code.
Yeah, disassembling firmware is disassembling the parts.
Yep.
So you get bootloader, kernel, file system.
Systems, yep. Kernel modules, kernel.
Yep.
Configuration. Yep.
Agreed.
Yeah. Debugging involves running the firmware in a controlled environment and examining its behavior using a debugger. But it can be helpful identifying vulnerabilities by analyzing the firmware's memory and register values. Okay. I mean, I'm a little bit there on that one, but...
This should have been a high-level-ish overview of reverse engineering firmware.
Yeah, but...
Because a lot more...
But number 2, there's a whole lot of a lot lower hanging fruit than going down that route first.
true. But then there's some resources on reverse engineering.
Yep.
Some challenges.
Yep.
A challenge, crackers.1.
And don't get me wrong, the tools they listed are all fantastic.
Yes.
Tool number 10, Wireshark, a network protocol analyzer can be used to analyze the communication between an IoT device and its network. This can be useful for reverse engineering the firmware's network functionality. That's a stretch.
Larry, you need to rewrite this article.
Yep, I'll get to that in all my spare time. And it will pay me in exposure.
Pretty much.
Yeah, I think it's just it's a language thing potentially. Yeah, I don't know who Volfosec is.
I don't know. Yeah, it was an article on Medium. So
yeah, but they have an amazing amount of followers. 5. Yep, and every one of their articles but one is a list of some variety.
Right,
Yep.
right.
Yeah.
Alrighty, now that we shredded that article, if you're doing web application testing with Burp,
Story number 9.
I mean, there's so many ways to but get a fresh IP address to do your web app testing, because you don't want to do that from IP addresses that are associated to you. You want to do that with disposable IP addresses. There's a lot of ways to skin that cat. I thought this was a pretty nice approach. So this Burp plugin will automatically create a DigitalOcean droplet that spins up a SOCKS 5 proxy and ties it into Burp. And so conceivably, you would get a new IP address with that droplet every single time. And I thought that was a pretty slick way. I'm like, I need this in my life. This is pretty cool.
Yeah, I think this one's a great one too. How many times doing a web app test have we tested something like this? Like, you log in and you get authentication cookies, and then you turn up a proxy and those cookies are still good because you're coming from a completely different IP address. Like, that's cookie theft in a nutshell. Like,
right.
You can prevent that from happening by adding that IP address to the cookie in an immutable value and rejecting them when all of a sudden it comes from a different place. Great for testing something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, definitely. If you've not been using this, or things like this that you've self-developed with Proxy Cannon, like having this spin up and stop the droplet, this takes a lot of scripting, and it's a lot of work for a lot of places. So this is a really nice integration.
Yep. And reading through it, it probably exists in a fashion, but it would be really awesome to have a button to just go, give me a new IP address.
Yes.
So we'll tear down the current DigitalOcean, create a new one, and you've got a new IP.
Yep.
And it would be done. It's probably as easy as going in, and they show in some of the screenshots, as doing the disable and then re-enable, and it probably does very similar types of things. But a one click button to do that would be amazing.
Speaking of tools, have you guys used Nuclei?
I have not.
So it's hard to describe. So it says in this article, it's a tool for scanning websites for vulnerabilities. Yes, it's that, but it's like an entire framework with all kinds of templates to do all kinds of different types of testing against all types of different targets. And now that when I was started to dig into it again, I was like, wait, I covered this on the show before. But this article talks about how to use Nuclei for OSINT. And the reason I left it in here is because I was like, I remember this tool. Like, I want to test it out again. And I did some of the examples in the article, and it wasn't very accurate. There was a lot of false I basically immediately found a false negative where it can take a username and then search for that username's presence in a whole bunch of different social media services and other services. Okay. But I knew this account had an Instagram account, and it didn't find the Instagram account.
Oh. So
be careful with that. But again, this being all open source, you could go modify that template. So Nuclei is kind of like that Swiss Army knife for a lot of bug bounty testers are using it. So
nice.
Definitely read up. If you haven't used it, definitely check it out. But again, caution, the OSINT stuff, well, I think it's interesting. Probably some better frameworks out there to do that kind of thing. Tyler, what are your favorite tools? Do you have like a tool that you use for OSINT, or is it really just a collection of kind of bookmarking kind of things or more automated things?
So have a bunch of sites and a bunch of tools that we kind of leverage. We've actually been building out a platform to do this and like CTI work via Unatrib. So it's essentially it's like a virtual environment in a browser that allows you to become a persona, manage your persona, save between the tools, access to tools, get access to the different breach data that we provide. So it's kind of in beta right now, but we're trying to build all of that into a single platform and environment, because it's very tedious between all the VMs, all the tools you're using, all the websites you have open. There's a lot of places that you can make mistakes and cross streams that can blow a good CTI investigation against something like a nation state. So trying to fix that.
One of my use cases, and like I haven't done this in a long time and I forgot, but I'm like, I know there's ways to automatically identify folks' kind of online presence, not just social media. Mm-hmm. And then if I have two people essentially, or two, I don't know, I guess you would say people, right, that I'm going after, not necessarily going after, but I want to know relationships between those two people. So like I got person A, I got person B, and I want to know if they're connected in any social media sites in some way. Tyler, I'm assuming that there's tools out there that basically automate a lot of that work for me.
Yeah, there's a ton of tools out there. I mean, you look at any of the Bellingcat toolboxes that link all those tools. I got a bunch of start pages that I can link on the Discord or on the site. But yeah, there's mapping tools. There's Maltego. There's
that's the one. Yeah.
Like Spy Cloud that maps breach credentials. So that's kind of what ours is doing, is mapping similarities in breach credentials, similarities in email or phone number that was used to register the account, or as a backup phone number, the same password or password style, the same format of the email. So being able to correlate all that real time and very quickly is very difficult. There's a lot of people that do that manually. You can use Maltego. There's ways to do that. It's hard.
Yeah, because the usernames may not be the same on all of the various accounts, but like you said, Tyler, there might be other artifacts associated with that person, phone number, email, and sets of those that you can use to draw correlations between the two.
Yep. I mean, in similar fashion, I'm reading What Traces in the Dark by Andy Greenberg still. I'm pretty good through that. Hey, put that anywhere. But the way, as I'm listening to it on an audiobook, when they talk about the takedown of Pirate Bay and Alpha Bay, the reasons why they were able to tie these to individuals is because of early on slip-ups in some of their communications and reuse of email addresses, and tied to real names and addresses and you name it. And yeah, Tyler, that's a really hard problem to solve doing all of these investigations.
Yeah, and there's lots of tools. Like I said, there's lots of tools to do this, and there's lots of good things to do it. It's when you have to do it at scale, or you have to do it with unattribution or misdirection, or you can't cross streams, and you're trying to do this via personas. There's a lot of places that you can end up messing up, and keeping all those straight at scale. When you're looking at something like call it 100 billion records. To do that search and just index and look for those correlations, like on our servers, we have very, very specific and engineered indexing and SSD caching to validate those and build that correlation map. That's a data science, a big data problem.
Are you using AI and ML to do better processing?
Not yet. That is next iteration.
But also that's the thing. But that's the thing I've heard cyber criminals talk about, and how a lot of them end up being. Some, I should say, being identified, is that early on in their criminal career, they used an account that was easily identifiable and associated to them. Yep. Then as they gain some more skill, they're like, I don't want to do that anymore. But if they commit a large enough crime and they get enough eyeballs on them, inevitably investigators such as Tyler and other of our friends, right, and law enforcement go, wait, I can trace you all the way back and go, wait, years ago you used that Gmail account and that's yours, and now I know where you live, and now we're going to bust on your door.
Well, I think the psychology of crime. I mean, if you were a military operator and you planned to do a covert operation, then you know what you're doing right from the start. But most criminals start by being honest, and then they do a little bit naughty and a little bit nasty, and they sort of slide into big crimes without admitting to themselves, here's the point where I'm going to commit a crime, so I better be careful from this point on.
Very true. So that means, as someone transitioning from, the legitimate life to the thug life, you need to cut ties and you need to be nation state level and start fresh.
You need to plan it properly. I'd like to talk about my article number 1, if you're done with that one.
Yeah, let's do it.
Because this one helps me understand AI a lot. I think I'm really getting it now. Because AI is really nothing more than what I used to do as a research scientist. You measure some data and then you try to fit a curve to it. This is how everything happened. All science worked. And so the point of this is you can run GPT-3 on your cell phone, on a Raspberry Pi, on your Mac laptop. And it'll run slow on a Raspberry Pi, but on a Mac, apparently it runs all right. And it can answer prompts and, write stories and do all that stuff for you. I'd like to set it up and see it go. But the reason you can do this is because the training data leaked. The results of the training data. And now I understand what GPT-3...
hold on, Sam. You said it wasn't the training data, it was the results of the training data.
The trained model. See, all it does is they have a way of reducing a sentence down to a set of numbers. And then they just have correlations between these numbers, like the neurons, the connections between. So there's, I think, about 4 billion parameters, and those are floating point numbers. You reduce the input data down to some numbers, you run it through sort of a matrix multiplication with these 4 billion parameters, and then you get another answer. So all it has to do is some math. And the point is, that was a proprietary secret. The result of that training, because training takes millions of dollars worth of computing time, but somebody dumped it on BitTorrent. So you can get the training data for GPT-3. And once you have it, you can run it on a modest computer. So it's so now I understand what it works, and this helps me understand, like what Noam Chomsky said, like last week in the Washington Post or New York Times. He said, you have to understand this is not intelligence of any kind, and this is not language of any kind. It does not understand what it's saying. It is just like drawing a line through the words and predicting what word will come next. That's why this is so scary. This is what all the scary Terminator movies and everything are trying to point out. You make something that looks like a human. It looks like it is intelligent, but it is not intelligent the way we are. It does not understand that there's a world out there and that there are consequences to your actions or anything of that sort.
It's just a bunch of if statements.
It's just a curve. It's taking a curve of what comes in and extrapolating where it goes next.
Very, very much like the predictive text on your phone.
It is nothing more than the predictive text on your app, just a better version of it. And so it can help you, but a human has to add all the actual judgment and sense to it, because it will never have any of that.
Yep, makes sense.
Anyway, I'm amazed you can run it on a Raspberry Pi. I thought it would be so difficult you can't run it at all, but that is not true. I'd kind of like to assign this to my students as homework, except I think it might be sort of illegal. Apparently, it all relies on basically pirate data. Anyway.
Oh.
Yeah, again, we're not lawyers. We don't pretend to give legal advice.
Yep.
Yeah, well, try to avoid getting canceled and fired and everything,
Yep. Well, and Sam, didn't they just release GPT-4?
Yeah.
Okay. Interesting. So
the training data, I think, for the most modern one the results of the training is not available.
Right.
But the most modern one. But
everyone that used ChatGPT though helped them get to version 4.
I mean, you're not wrong. You're not wrong. They added more training because of the questions that were asked, right?
Right.
Yeah, and the other thing they wrote about in here is that it's very expensive to run these AI models. Something like 30 times more expensive than classical search, and they're quite worried about the eventual business case of how you're going to charge customers enough to pay for what it really costs to do these AI things. Everybody's building AI into everything now, but it's all being built in as sort of a lost leader.
Right.
Yeah, well, what you can get, what, ChatGPT Pro, and it's fairly inexpensive for a user?
Yeah, but even the free version you can use, and it's costing them, like a significant amount of money per query, even to run the free version. They say somebody put up a game using AI, and people started using it to write like business reports. And they said it costing them like hundreds of thousands of dollars a month to pay for the Amazon bills to run that thing. It really takes a lot of GPU time.
Crazy.
Do you guys use FlatHub? Flatpaks?
I do not use Flatpaks.
So it's one of the, contenders for becoming a standard on Linux for distributing or packaging and distributing software, I should say. What's interesting is that Robert McQueen is, I believe he created FlatHub. He's the CEO of Endless, and wrote a blog, which I linked to in the article. It's linked to in the article that I linked to, and is actually secured some funding. So it says for Flatpak. I think of Flatpak as the actual software, FlatHub as the repository where you can put your packaged software. And so secured $100,000 in funding and aiming for $150,000 more. And I mean, kind of in a controversial manner, said that he's promoting Flatpak as like the Linux package manager for distributing software. So he says, Flatpak has solved the largest technical issue which has held back the mainstream growth and acceptance of the Linux desktop, namely the difficulty for app developers to publish their work in a way that makes it easy for people to discover, download, install, and use. Now, I will say I agree with the sentence that's where it starts with the largest technical issue that has held back mainstream Linux desktop is the ability to go to one place or go to a centralized place and get software. The App Store for Linux. There is no the App Store. There's multiple app stores, Snap, and all that stuff. Apt repositories, as we discussed earlier. But he sees Flatpak as every Linux distro could use this, and this could be the place to package your software, and some of this funding and evangelism will be behind this notion. Sam?
Why is it better than, say, the App Store? What's the difference?
Well, which App Store? The one in...
I mean, I think the APT.
Yeah.
Debian app.
Debian derivative.
Well, when I've compared the two, this is my opinion, the apt repositories, as Santiago established, right, is typically older software that's more difficult to upgrade because it's native to the distribution and has to work within the distribution. And so upgrading that may mean you got to upgrade that, maybe you got to upgrade that, and then you're going to have a lot of unhappy users that are now their software that relied on that software.
Dependency hell.
Yeah, you're going to get into dependency hell, maybe not within your distribution, but on your users now that you're forcing them to upgrade. So I need this latest version of XYZ software that requires glibc to be updated, but updating glibc breaks a whole bunch of other crap, right?
How does Flatpak prevent that?
Yeah, so
it's a containerized system. Oh. Yeah, it's using containerized. So both Snap and Flatpak, I don't think of it as a Docker container necessarily, but it's some kind of containerized technology that both Snap and Flatpak support to be able to do.
So that means I can have 300 versions of glibc on my system taking up even more space. Got it.
I believe that's what it means.
And 299 of them are vulnerable to some... Got it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it does mean that, but it does solve the fundamental problem of Linux, which is, that dependency hell. This is like most people can't stand it. And in Windows, you can just double-click on the installer, install something, and it will work. And you totally cannot do that in Linux.
Most of the time.
Yeah, most of the time on both cases.
Yeah, your mileage definitely varies. My whole thing is to have this open environment, as we've talked about in our earlier segment, right, is the security behind it. So Robert says that they need to make sure that as they grow, we continue to be a platform that can give users confidence in the quality and security of apps that we offer. So setting up infrastructure, ensuring developers are shipping best products they can possibly ship to users, automated linting and security scanning on the FlatHub back end to help developers avoid bad practices, unnecessary sandbox permissions, outdated dependencies, which is promising, but I think the devil's in the details in that statement too. Like, what prevents someone from maliciously tainting a package, right? It could pass all the checks, but I'm adding a call back to whatever my CNC server inside everyone that downloads that package.
Well, you have to maintain the store, just like the Google store or the Apple store. But typically, you have to have a flow of money to pay for that to happen.
Correct, and that's what he's securing is funding to make this happen. Which, in that sense, I mean, if it is an app store like a Google or an Apple, it conceivably could work. But you got to convince the entire open source community to get behind it.
Yep,
and that I think is the greatest challenge.
And if you're securing funding to make that happen, how does it
money?
Exactly. Now, how do you use it to pay for yourself? Do you have to subscribe?
Yeah,
to a
that's what they're talking. It's a great point. That's exact. So Robert McQueen did an interview on the Linux.
Go ahead.
Linux Unplugged podcast.
Yep.
They brought him on as a guest, which is where I got the background for all of this. And right now, Robert and team is trying to figure out how do we charge money without pissing people off and going against the fundamentals in open source. Is it a subscription? Is it a pay per app? How do we pay the developers? How do you get people to pay for software that's you're not really paying for the software,
right?
Like kind of how he pitched it was you're paying for the service, kind of like when you used to pay for the CDs to Red Hat. Yep. You're not paying for the software, you're just paying for the.
You can.
I don't have to download it. I can just buy it and install it. And not
I mean, I can download it and I can get it, or I can wait 3 weeks for it to arrive via UPS.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Or you can be like an app store where only the lame stuff is free and all the cool stuff costs money.
Right.
Yep. Like essentials could be free, but like if you want to do this weird thing that maybe it costs 99 cents, and 50% of that goes to 50 cents of that goes to Flatpak, and 50 cents goes to the developer.
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, that's what they're talking about.
Interesting
they haven't
model.
done it. Yeah, it's an interesting model. I think there's a reliability factor that would have to be there if people are paying for it. If I'm paying a subscription to Flatpak and I put Kden Live on my system and it doesn't work, I'm gonna be really pissed off.
Well, the first thing any app developer is going to ask is, can you make it also run on Windows and Mac, because that will amplify my user base by 100.
Absolutely. And a lot of the larger free and open source packages, like the one I mentioned, Kden Live, there's the audio editing tool whose name escapes me.
Audacity?
Audacity is one, but there's another one that's Ardour, Ardour.
Okay.
Is an multi-track audio editing software. And a lot of the software, when I go to the site and I look at it for Linux, they also have Windows and Mac versions as well. They're the free and open source version of this software. If you don't want to pay for Adobe Creative Suite, now you've got alternatives, and can see if they're charging for it now for the packaging. It's still cheaper than what you're going to pay for commercial software. And I tell you what, for like most tasks, for most people, like it works. I use it. It works just fine. I'm not doing anything ridiculous though.
But are the sales of the Linux version actually going to be enough to justify the development expense? That's hard to believe.
Yeah. I mean, people are doing it now for free. So.
Right. But that's unsustainable. That's the.
Yeah, I worry about what the future of some of the software, projects are that do this. Yeah. Although I imagine if you dug under the covers, there's a way for them to. They have to be funding it somehow, right? Like I think a lot of these larger projects are not. They're funding it somehow.
Yeah, I think I heard that 90% of all Linux development is actually people working at companies like Google actually getting paid. Mm-hmm. They're just companies that choose to participate in the open source community.
Right.
Makes sense, because then you tie into that collective wisdom.
Yeah, and for a lot of these software packages, if you're a big corporation and you don't want to pay for hey, we're using this software, guess what? We're going to give you a full-time developer to just work on it, and because we're not paying for it, but we want to use it and we want to have some say as to what the features are. So we'll just fund a developer or 12 or whatever to work on it.
Yeah, and ultimately they do make money because they sell things like iPhones and Nest devices and stuff that are using that Linux.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Unless you're Amazon and they're the Echoes, which were sold. Every one of them was sold at a loss.
Well, if they're selling it at a loss, that's because they're planning to make money when you use it to order products in Amazon or something. They've got a way of ultimately making money.
Which arguably there's some discussion. Well, so we talked about this a little bit before, that the Echo was Bezos's baby, and that his intent was to sell them at a loss because you would use it to buy stuff on Amazon. It turns out most people don't do that.
No.
And now Bezos isn't there. So
yeah. And now they're like, hey, we can listen on everyone's conversation, and that's got value.
Yeah.
We can sell that data.
Yeah.
Use it to target ads, and I think there's evidence that is in fact happening.
Does that happen on the Google devices too? I feel like the Amazon devices are really bad. I feel a little better with the Google devices, but the same stuff is going on, isn't it?
They're actually doing a lot more targeted advertising than Amazon. I think I might recommend the opposite, but I don't know.
I haven't played with my Google devices enough. I have two Google Nest displays, V2s in my office currently because of reasons. And well, they show lots of pretty pictures on the screensaver right now. That's all I can say.
That's what mine do. Yeah.
Yeah.
You can tie it to your Google Photos account.
Oh yeah.
Speaking of AI, right? It's how I explain machine learning to non-technical people is Google Photos. And because I can go to Google Photos and it goes, hey, who's that person? Right? And I'm like, well, that person is my wife. And it goes, okay, I can recognize all the pictures of your wife. Because Google trained an ML model to be able to identify things. And I can go into my Google Photos archive and I can search for monkeys. And it shows me pictures of monkeys.
Yep. Same thing.
Maybe some pictures of me, which it gets confused, which is weird.
Yep.
But you know,
I mean,
it's pretty accurate.
You're wearing a diaper near the pool and you kind of got that pose.
Right.
So I mean, it's not wrong. But iPhone will do the same thing. You go in your photo library and you search for cat.
Yeah,
and
it knows what a cat because it's trained the model. Yeah.
Yep. Some other ones that I find that's fascinating recently that's been an amazing one is the OCR capabilities on my iPhone. You take a picture and like you can like highlight the text on the photo and it like copy paste it and like
Google does it too. It's got a button copy text.
Same thing on the actual Mac. Like a number of times I've gone to try to like right click copy a picture and save it to download for memes and stuff when it's actually gone and highlighted the photo and copied the text out of the meme. I'm like, no, that's not what I wanted.
No, it's not what I want.
The best part is the translation. Because you can do translation. So I have this amazing book all written in Japanese about Japanese swords. And it is literally a documentation of thousands of antique Japanese swords and their makers and the stories behind them and descriptions and pictures. And it's all written in Japanese. So you take a picture of the page and you highlight the text and you have it translated.
Nice.
Oh.
We did that at DEF CON China, and it was bloody awesome. You just hold up your phone and you could read the signs, read the menu, everything.
Yep. We actually, SAN 617, James did this not that long ago. He was teaching a class for a lot of German speakers, and they didn't have much English. And when they were going through the labs, they were effectively copying and pasting the labs out of the electronic workbook and pasting it to Google Translate.
Yeah.
And then doing the lab that way. So it was taking up all this extra time that they didn't really have. So one night he went and just fed all of that stuff through Google Translate, which they said was really good, and then created a version of the electronic workbook in German and created another fork of the repo for the electronic workbook and said, hey, just check this out, and it's all in German for you.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I did exactly that at DEF CON. Before I went, I had the auto-translated version into Chinese of everything, and that helped them. Then I tried to do it for a class in Saudi Arabia, and I translated it into Arabic. You have to put some extra UTF-8 code on the page for the Arabic to come out right, and I had trouble with that.
A couple of just software vulnerabilities explained in my stories number 6 and 7. 6 has a tie to Spring for Shell, and they took Spring for Shell and they're like, how do I do mass assignment, but this is manipulating the code objects that take in user input, and so you can adjust attributes of your object through user-controlled variables if you're not careful in your code to separate the user data from the logic. It means if you have an object that, I like their example of an attribute that is admin, so is the user admin or not, if certain vulnerabilities exist, the user can basically change that flag and adjust the attributes of your coding objects. And so mass assignment is the kind of class that they talk about in this article, and they do it in the context of Python, which was pretty cool. Also, Jenkins. This article made me not want to run Jenkins anymore ever.
And I've, at the end of this, I've got something to share on this. But go ahead.
You mean Jenkins is going to become WordPress?
I mean, it's pretty close. I mean,
Yeah.
it's Java, right? So, I mean, there's that.
Let's talk about Java.
It's kind of in the same class as PHP, pun intended. But I've had my struggles with Jenkins, right? Like, someone set up Jenkins and we started using it, and then it gets in your critical path, and you're like, I really need to secure it, and then I'm like, oh, I need to upgrade it, and then I'm like, oh my god, upgrading it was I've upgraded a lot of software as a systems admin in my day, and I was like, oh my god, this is so painful. And then so you don't update it, but it has like heinous vulnerabilities, and thankfully in my case we just like replaced it with something else, and new development team replaced it, and it is no more. And I'm like, thank god I don't have to deal with Jenkins. Then I come across this article that there's a remote code execution, and it has its roots in cross-site scripting vulnerability. But the way you enable that is you have to load a Jenkins plugin from their, what do they call it? The update center. And the update center is actually a central repository. So part of this hack is you have to understand the process of creating a plugin. I'm reading from the article. So it will be available for everyone. In short, the initial upload process is to write a plugin in Java, submit a pull request to the Jenkins team. After review and approval, a GitHub repository will be created on the Jenkins CI GitHub account, and you'll be granted write access to it.
So once you get your initial pull request in, you now have pull requests to that repository for that plugin, which you can modify at will.
Correct.
Dun dun dun.
I read that part, and I'm like, I am done with Jenkins.
So you wanted them to have some security review of change there?
Yeah, or like don't give me control over it. Like, sure, let people contribute, but like take over control of that.
I mean,
that's how a lot of, not all, but many plugin, like Metasploit. Metasploit is someone will submit like, hey, here's a new exploit module for Metasploit.
Yep.
My recollection is like the Metasploit team would just take that over and go like credit the author and then maintain it moving forward. Right.
Yep. I'm the captain now.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Correct.
But now again, very, very similar to the WordPress model in that anybody can write a plugin for WordPress, and it doesn't even has to be centrally located. They put it in the WordPress store, as it were.
Right.
And once it gets in the store, they can change it to be whatever they want and include vulnerabilities into the code, just kind of like this.
Correct.
Except it's on your blog or your other content delivery system. And
now this is Jenkins, so which means I can basically take over the supply chain for your software.
Yep. Now,
I think they ought to make it like the Debian repos, where you have different levels of it. You have the trusted stuff, and then you have the community stuff and the untrusted stuff.
Yeah,
so
Right. ArchLint's the same way as what we talked about previously, right?
Yeah.
Now, one of my coworkers,
official extra in user repository.
One of my coworkers picked up on this article, and I don't know why I didn't get it into the show notes because I saw it a day or so ago. But their question was, is this really a bug or is it a go-to-market strategy?
Yeah.
Well, it's a high availability, low security strategy.
Yeah.
For sure.
What could go wrong?
What could possibly
Reminds me, what about Firefox plugins and Chrome plugins? I wonder what the rules are for that stuff.
There are rules, but plugins in the browser get a really high level. So everything that I've read, and I haven't delved into like deep details, but I've delved in enough to be like, I don't want a lot of plugins in my browser. Like I have pared back so many plugins. Like I never now go and install like willy-nilly any kind of plugin in there.
But I mean, to what extent, if you go to the official Chrome store, to what extent has that stuff been vetted? Thinking about the Android store, I'm betting not very much.
There is a process, but how good it is, I don't know.
Google doesn't tend to clean it very much.
It has to be a pretty heinous offense.
Yeah.
Yep. Hey, Sam, before you go, I was hoping you could talk about your story number 13, the remote code execution vulnerability in Windows HTTP protocol stack.
I know, that was pretty simple. So Microsoft just patched this yesterday, and they gave you a tool. It's an Outlook that Microsoft calls it an elevation of privilege on Microsoft Outlook. And you can scan your Exchange server to see if you have any emails that are suspicious. But this company that wait a minute, I think I'm mixing up. Oh, I'm mixing up with another one. Pardon me. Yeah, this is the one. Yeah, the HTTP3 protocol stack. There's not much information. It's just a brief announcement from Search EU with no technical details that says with a specially crafted packet, they can execute arbitrary code on Windows 2022 or Windows 11. And they expect it to be exploited soon. So you have to put on the patch, but no explanation.
I find it interesting that it's HTTP3 protocol stack, which is...
oh, yes, that's the other thing. Only if you have the market feature turned on matter. I don't know how many people use an HTTP3. That might be a saving grace.
Yeah, and the sort of the questions that I have here is that all of the browsers should support HTTP3, but it's a matter of whether or not you've turned HTTP3 on at your server side. And is this a server or a client based? I mean, you're saying that it's, Windows Server 2022. That kind of leads me to believe if you're running,
but also Windows 11. So I'm thinking maybe run the client. But this is a very good point, and those technical details were not in the announcement from the EU.
Interesting.
But yeah, you're right. That is pretty interesting. It does sort of suggest a ping of death attack kind of thing coming up.
Yep. It's not good.
I had a question for Tyler along those lines. Tyler, you and I haven't chatted in a while, so you get random questions from me now live on the air. But we're talking about Black Lotus, right? And how much harder is it to escalate within Windows today? Like those methods and techniques for escalating, because it's not just one level of escalation from like user to admin, because once you're admin, you have to escalate a little further on Windows to really gain full control of the operating system. How much does that come into play to basically push attackers to going into pre-kernel type exploitation? Because we talked about the Windows platform binary table, but that's more of a persistence method than it is a privilege escalation, right?
Yeah, privilege escalation is still an issue in Windows. It's an issue in all
Linux. Believe me, in Linux, dude, it's ridiculously easy too. Yeah.
Yeah.
But with all the potatoes, there's a variation of potatoes. You have sweet potato, local potato. There's probably a dozen different potato exploits. So and no fix exploitation that makes Windows privilege escalation once you're on a box pretty trivial.
So we like to call them forever days.
There are a lot of forever days, and there's a lot of no fix, like kind of by design. It's inherent with inside of the protocol. So unless you're dealing with Windows that is very, very hardened, and they went to the means of shutting down specific registry keys and protocols and setting up good group policies, whether that's local or via the domain, unless all of those pieces are in place, there are quite a few ways to do privilege escalation. I would say it's pretty difficult to get to a point unless you're, again, going to a very, very hardened Windows state, which there are STIG guides for that, and there are government systems and corporate systems that do this. But even with those, there's always a way. Whatever software you have installed, you've got DLL side loading, you've got DLL hijacking, you've got legitimate binary side loading. There are just so many intricacies in Windows now that allow you, like with other applications installed, that allow you to privilege escalate that's pretty trivial.
And trusted installer, we talked about that when you weren't on the show. That's another mechanism, right?
Yeah, there's trusted installers, a mechanism that allows those installations to up escalate, but it's similar like a sudo or the way in which you're providing that access at a limited time via a mechanism that's by design designed to do that, but there are ways to abuse that, obviously. So again, that's another cat and mouse game with inside of Windows that will always continue just because of how Windows well, just because of how OSs are integrated with programs and how deep we've gotten at an OS level from complexity. There's just so many ways to do this.
But the platform binary table is interesting in this regards because it's not so much an escalation as it is a persistence method. And I was kind of shocked that Black Lotus didn't use this as a persistence method to be able to persist reboots, because Black Lotus by design, conceivably a Windows reinstall, you're back to square one. You might still be vulnerable, but you've at least kicked out the attacker.
See, I think a lot of these groups are saving, like, while they are doing research and even capabilities are being built into some of these kits. I mean, we've seen proof of concept code for, what is it, CV 2022, it's like 21984, 21894, whatever the code was for the boot kit stuff. Like, Black Lotus has been looking into that and researching it and getting ready to put that into their kit for quite a while. And we've seen that with Conti and others. So just because they're not using it doesn't mean that it is not available for them to use, and or it's not going to be available in the future. There's no reason to leverage some of this when they have so much access and they're being implanted into so many networks. They're having a hard time keeping up with the priority of ransoms, which companies they're doing first, and the communication and the affiliates that are actually working these ransoms. It's a logistics issue from a scalability side. So just because we haven't seen them use some of this, like, the future and day is coming where these kits maybe have that already built in, and it's just a matter of flipping that binary bit in order to leverage that persistence mechanism. So I would not get comfortable with the fact that they haven't been using them.
And this is just skirting right around EDR.
Oh yeah. I mean, there are a lot of things to get around when you're talking about today's modern ransomware C2 and implementation, because you've got AMC, you've got the Windows Defender with all the telemetry and EDR access to the kernel that is being fed with telemetry from Defender for Endpoint, whatever their M365 cloud telemetry gathering is, and that's all getting updated with inside the signatures. But you still have things that have to operate, misconfigurations, and the OS inherently is designed for the end user to be functional. So unless you're going out of your way to harden these and to do good network security and build your AD out correctly and finding all those little holes, like, again, keys on keyboard operators and ransomware with keys on keyboard is going to get around this, and it's just like any other pen test. Like, there's always a way, because there's so much attack surface right now. Now, again, that is changing. Windows is a lot more secure. It's a lot better. There are, you can't just script kiddie your way through it, but it also doesn't take a ton of effort if you spend any time with inside of C2 or malware.
Well, you can if people haven't done much to secure their environment, and they still have.
And that's the ones that are getting around, right? Like, it's the lower hanging fruit. It is people that are
what was the
high target.
I was listening to
attack.
I mean, like, on the opposite end of the spectrum of hardening that we talked about is I was listening to the Recorded Future does one Click Here podcast, and they talked about the Mexican hacktivist group, Guaya something, and basically they described their.
I was thinking guava Mayans, but it's not
guava. No, it's something else. But they described their hacks as, like, we ran Nmap and we found the Exchange server and we ran a Python script to exploit proxy shell, and we downloaded all the email addresses from the Exchange server. And I'm like, most of us could, even if we had zero knowledge about that stuff, could figure that out in, like, maybe less than an hour, how to do that style of attack. Like, we could, if you gave us the vulnerable network, we could Nmap scan and find is it the proxy shell exploit for Exchange, the popular one, right? That they used, and we could go to GitHub and we could pull the exploit down and we could do it. Like, that's their level of sophistication on the hacker side, air quotes hacker side. You can call them malicious or not, but you got to listen to the podcast. I mean, most of us know that story as well. That was the Pegasus group, right? The Pegasus software the Mexican government's using to spy on folks. It ties into that whole thing. Their level of sophistication was not high because the security level of those systems was not high at all, like at all.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you're running Exchange today and you're not on O365, like you're screwed.
Yeah,
Like that better be behind your firewall. You better have VPN with multi-factor. There better not be anything exposed to the outside. No OWA, no EWS. There should be nothing. If that's not the case, like you're probably owned. I mean, you just look at this week. In fact, the Outlook, what is 2023 23397. I think that's it.
Mm-hmm.
The Outlook NTLM hash grab from Outlook clients, like they're exposing credentials right there because of on-prem Exchange. On-prem Exchange is broken. Even if you know what you're doing and you're doing a good job, the shared permission model inside of Active Directory for on-prem Exchange has almost no way, and there's no way from a default standpoint, but no way to actually secure that without exposing highly privileged accounts inside of Active Directory.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's just going to get owned. There's just no good way around that.
Mm-hmm. Craziness. TPM vulnerabilities. This one will take you back, Larry.
Yeah, it will.
This is Quark's lab.
Oh, jeez.
And you know who works for Quark's lab?
No.
Someone from way back in the day from Core Security.
Oh, God. There's so many of them.
Mr. Yvonne Arce.
Okay, all right.
Works.
Yeah.
Now, he's not credited. He's not the author of this post, but I know that because I'm stalking you, Yvonne. Loving it. We haven't talked in a long time. But looking forward to catch up hopefully soon. But Quark's lab produced some research that they found vulnerabilities in the TPM 2.0 reference implementation code, which, as it turns out, is the basis for both hardware and virtualized TPMs. That because when you have the requirements from Windows 11 that it needs a TPM 2.0 and you're running Windows 11 in a virtual machine, you have to provide a virtualized TPM. But virtual or hardware are based off the reference code, which from what the article says, pretty much most people are vulnerable to these two particular vulnerabilities that they found in the TPM, which is kind of interesting because I've been talking with folks about the EDK2 reference code for UEFI and how people kind of weave their way through that. So not every vulnerability in the reference code ends up in production and your mileage varies. This was kind of a situation where I'm kind of sounded like most people are vulnerable. Tyler, I know you're kind of in tune with more of the TPM. I'm weak on the TPM side. I need to spend some time studying that. And also BitLocker, because BitLocker leverages the TPM to do its thing, not just the encryption, but the validation of the integrity of the system, right? Leverages the TPM.
And more importantly, have you installed Windows 11 on ESXi, and how the hell did you get your virtual TPM? Because that seems to not be like there's guides out there on how to do it, but
they don't work.
But they don't work.
Yeah, there's lots of ways to make that work. But yeah, this is interesting because of the requirement. So VMware 6.5 and 6.7 just end of lifed. So there's now a requirement push to go to ESXi 7. And when you move to ESXi 7, that requires a TPM backed hardware. And whether that is inside the virtual environment, so anything that is using that hardware version of the virtual machine and or the ESXi version, you now have a virtual TPM and a hardware-backed TPM that both have to be compatible in order to get out of an end-of-life system setup. So this actually adds another layer of complexity and security bugs that just is making this a very murky place to be with TPM.
The irony,
is very...
And I got to go check this. I actually needed a Windows 11 system, and Microsoft makes free versions of Windows 11 for developers available, with some restrictions, of course, like a 90-day license and that type of stuff. And it was easy to fire up, import, and start using. Like, I didn't have to set up a TPM because it was already apparently included in the OVF. But now this is VMware Fusion on the Mac that I'm running this on, as opposed to ESXi.
On an Intel Mac, yeah.
Good.
Yeah, those will all come into play eventually because you've got obviously your virtual TPM requirement for the virtual OS, and then you have your hypervisor TPM as a requirement for the hypervisor to then provide infrastructure back to the virtual TPM, and then you have the hypervisor itself requiring the TPM as a hardware-backed support. So there's a ton of complexity that's made even good sysadmins I know not do this right, and whole organizations are in a state of insecurity because they just cannot get off of some of this with the hardware that they have, and TPM not being able to back some of that.
So it's interesting. Every organization now should be inventorying their TPMs.
Yes.
For a lot of reasons, not just the virtual.
Well, and then you start talking about asset management of those TPMs and secure and how you're leveraging those TPMs with inside the virtual OS. Is that using BitLocker, and then are those BitLocker TPM backed keys being backed up into something like Active Directory, or how are you managing that? Like, you're getting very, very murky and a lot of layers of cryptography that is not easy to understand.
So Windows 11 is going to require a TPM version 2.0 or greater. Is there a TPM? There is a TPM 3.0, correct?
Let's see. I believe their 3.0 is a spec and standard. I don't know if it's fully pushed out. The TPM 2.1 is pretty common, or 2.0 for most systems now. Modern systems have that.
Yeah, but modern that's a relative term, right? Like, as I talk to some people and they're like, I don't have a system with a TPM on it yet, right? Which is interesting.
Yeah. For the record, there was an amazing system that Tyler shared with a bunch of us via private channels a couple weeks ago, and I'm like, crap, I actually need a system that can run Windows 11. So I went to go order it, and it was in my cart, and when it was in my cart, it sold out.
Oh, I think it's back in stock.
Is it?
For a similar price.
Go back for a similar price.
I'm told that that's not a great.
I don't care if it's great. I need a system that can run Windows 11.
My pocket.
What's that?
4 nicks in my pocket. That's all I care about. 4 nicks in my pocket.
4 nicks in my pocket.
Yeah, there should be a song there.
Yeah.
Just Windows 11, huh?
$20 in my pocket.
Yep.
Just Windows 11. Yep. Admittedly, I now have Windows 11 in a virtual machine for 90 days. So I mean,
there you go. That works.
But geez, now that was one that killed me this week. Is that I needed a Windows 11 system. I had a Windows 10 system. That's the trial, and Microsoft up until a couple weeks ago was providing VMware and other virtual machines so that you could test Microsoft Edge in all the operating systems, including a Windows 11. They're no longer there. So it was a minimal Windows install, absolute bare bones Windows install with Edge, like base model Windows image. And I grabbed that for 10 because I needed a Windows 10 image and that stuff. And that was small. It was 4.5 gig download. No more. That page redirects to stuff, and there's no more virtual machine images. So I found the ones for developers, but the one for developers has like all the .NET components and VS Code, and it's 21.5 gig to download.
I ran.
Hit me up, Larry. I'll show you the trick to get back to that page.
Yeah, there's like I remember when I did the whole C2 lab in Docker, and I used QEMU in Docker to run Windows. That's still available on our GitHub, github.com/Security Weekly. I haven't updated that particular one in a while, but they were, Tyler, what was it? Was it Vagrant that was pulling from there was like a repository where people could package up Windows. I'm not sure what the licensing was.
Yeah, it's a trial license. They also have the ability, if you leverage things like the developer tools and say put in responsive touch and change your OS to something like a Samsung 5 or 6. All of these pages magically are accessible, and you can get to the ISOs or the download links.
And I just want to be clear, we're not talking about like pirating Windows to run as like our daily driver kind of thing.
They're within the license.
It's legit for like development, teaching, training, research, and I spin up the VM like I do my thing, and I spin it down. Like I'm not running Windows 10 or 11 as like a I'm
Yeah,
not
the
stealing a
180 days
license.
there.
Yeah, I'm not stealing a license.
And exactly same thing. And Microsoft is providing these for edge testing, and they give you. I think they gave you 30 days for edge testing and one rearm. But they also say there's like this big warning comes up on your desktop background, tells you how to do the rearm and everything right in the background. They say, hey, by the way, when you start this thing up, take a snapshot and then revert to snapshot, and your license is still good.
Yeah.
Like,
well, because they want to enable people to do development, research, testing, that kind of thing.
And
I mean, even
quite-
security-wise, Microsoft's like, yeah, like get it. Like if you find bugs, tell us, and we're gonna fix them. They're great about that.
Because quite honestly, like that's what I need to do is like I need to have a base OS install.
Yeah.
I need to copy that base OS install. I need to run whatever application I need for an hour.
Yes.
And then I need to throw it away.
Right. Right.
Perfect.
Yeah.
This is
I'm
the
saying
perfect solution for that.
I need to spin it up. It needs to be vulnerable with some software or whatever. You need to do some stuff and then spin it down.
Yep. And that was exactly where I was today with this Windows 11 developer image. I got it up, running, ready to go, and I'm like, create full clone so I could do my application. I'm like, you have no hard drive space left. I'm like, damn it. That's why I want this Edge one, because it was a quarter of the size.
Use the link clones, man. Those link clones off of a snapshot that is fully armed, that link clone always goes to the snapshot and doesn't affect the master clone.
Okay.
And it doesn't take up any disk space. It just does a diff between the VMDKs.
That's good to know. That's good to know.
Oh, what about sandwiches?
What about sandwiches?
What?
We were talking about. I was talking with Mandy, and all of a sudden we started talking about food, and I listened to the open source security podcast with Kurt and Josh.
Yep,
who we had on the show, and I think it was Kurt that said he was comparing. You're making a meal for yourself, or you're making a meal from your family, or you have a restaurant, or you have a chain of restaurants. And those are different scales,
for sure,
right, of providing food. We have that now. Extrapolate that into computing. I've got a desktop for me. I've got my phone. I've got a desktop for me. I support my family's computers. I support a small business. I support now enterprises with 100,000.
So I support a small business. I support an enterprise with 5,000 users, and I support.
Yeah. So there's different things that need to scale both for sysadmin and security in those environments, much like you would scale. You want a restaurant. I know someone that sells like restaurant equipment, and he's like, it's totally opposite, Paul, the way you cook, right? Like you build an open fire, right? And you grill your food and you prepare it and you go get the special meat and it's fresh and you prepare it for your family. He's like, when you get in the restaurants that, especially like a chain, dude, they want like someone taking food, putting it in something, pushing a button, out comes a meal, and to serve it, right? Because they've got to serve 1,000 people an hour.
Like
or whatever
honestly, that's where for like you think about chicken and pork chops and meat and that type of stuff. That's where sous vide came out of.
Yeah.
Like you can take 100 steaks and put them in sous vide overnight, and run them at rare. And customer orders a T-bone, you pull that thing out of the sous vide,
sear it, and
you sear it a little extra longer to make it medium rare, and done. It's 5 minutes.
Right. But that's actually not a bad method, to be honest with you.
Yeah. We digress. I will definitely midday put the sous vide cooler on the counter, start warming up the water with sous vide, and throw a frozen steak in it that's already been vacuum sealed from the freezer. Frozen. By dinner time, you got steak. That's all you got to do is sear it.
I love sous vide. I got to do more of it.
Yes.
I haven't done enough of it.
But sandwiches.
You put a link into like rotating sandwiches, Larry. I was like totally distracted. And I'm like, I'm going to this website and all it is. And now that I click on it, I'm like, this could have been something really. Larry could have totally like baited me on this one. And it could have been something horrible. But it's like all these sandwiches. I'm like, oh my God.
Oh man.
I love sandwiches. I'm like, I love Italian grinders is my number one.
Yep.
Gyros may be my number two. Gyros may be my number two. Po' boys are like, those are up there too.
A shrimp po' boy?
Like in New Orleans though.
Yep.
Or like a steak sandwich from Philadelphia, like if you're in Philly. Pastrami, Rubens.
The best part is looking through these sandwiches. There's There's a cheeseburger. There's actually a big picture of a Big Mac in there. There's a cheeseburger.
Cheeseburgers are technically a sandwich.
Yep, because they're stuffed
something in between
two slices
bread.
of bread. Yep.
Oh, like egg sandwiches. Oh, I love eggs. I
Yep.
make
A couple
egg sandwiches.
down. There's an egg sandwich on a bagel.
Like breakfast for me is really, it means egg sandwich. Like in my vernacular, if I'm breakfast is like a sandwich.
Oh, see breakfast for me.
Speaking of scale, like Paul, you're number 4. I actually didn't read that until now. That is the most terrifying story here, I think.
Yeah. So deploying firmware at scale. Whether it's sandwiches or firmware, doing things at scale. This was really interesting, right? Like the way
I want to do this.
Yeah, like I'm very interested, and of course, I don't think it'll ever be disclosed publicly exactly how major providers, cloud providers, are provisioning all of their hardware and firmware, right? Like that's the secret sauce that has to be protected. Because if you gain below ring 0 access at a cloud provider, like you're not just pwning one company, you're pwning a lot
all
of companies, all the companies. So updating firmware at this level for a cloud provider, super important. What like I've heard rumblings of is that, you know, and we've seen some of the articles public too, right? They're acquiring hardware, they're getting custom firmware on that hardware. I mean, you can read articles about Google that was like, oh, we're buying boards, cheaper boards, rolling all our own firmware and software for them, and when they fail, we're just swapping them out. Just some things I read about Google, right? But you got to update all of this firmware. And this was a method that was using iPXE as the bootloader in the UEFI shell to determine if the firmware was out of date and applying a firmware update. I'm kind of curious why they didn't look into LVFS, because this is just one firmware. Like they've got potentially network interface card firmware to do as well. But this was really, really interesting.
Because PXE is pretty standard for a lot of those very large deployments. So this iPXE integration for UEFI shell makes a lot of sense, but at scale where this is scriptable and automated based off of like triggers, like PXE has the ability to trigger based on version and like what's happening on the hardware. Man, that's like large scale pwnage if you can infect the PXE repository or trigger mechanism and where it's actually pulling the firmware update from.
And updating the BMC on these as well through this process too, Tyler, was like, that's super, because like that's another, I mean, rightfully so. I'm glad to see them call that out as something else they need to update as a component on these boards that often goes overlooked in a lot of organizations that shouldn't, because there's vulnerabilities there. Again, talk about persisting at a deep level on the system. BMC is the place to be. And so they're using this process that uses iPXE to do that, which is interesting. I haven't like fully grokked everything in this article, to be honest with you, like exactly what that means.
I haven't either. I'm now very curious.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, right? It's a lot of examples there too. I'm actually kind of surprised they actually published like how they're, well, I guess it's to gain customer confidence would be my guess. But also kind of dangerous. You giving up kind of how you're doing it. People might pick it apart, right? Said
no one would do that, Paul.
Oh boy! It says our entire fleet operates in UEFI mode. That's what it says. And they utilize secure boot.
OPSEC fail.
Yeah,
oh wait, that's the variable you pull from. That's great. Look at that. That's nice. Wow.
Not scary at all.
Flashing. So this requires a flashing binary written for the UEFI environment. So upon boot, iPXE. So iPXE is the bootloader that then they're using this specialized bootloader to query the current BIOS version compared to the latest version and trigger a flash if there's a mismatch. That's crazy.
Man, better keep those infrastructure guys. Hopefully, they're using a privilege access workstation, as all infrastructure guys and AD admins should, but they don't.
Right, but they're probably
they don't use this out of band network to anything on the internet.
and protecting the keys, because I would imagine if they're booting a custom bootloader, that they control the secure boot environment to add the hash of that bootloader so that it boots on secure boot themselves. So they're controlling. I might get
like open manage for Dell or the ILO keys and management suite for that side of it.
If it were my design, I would tell the hardware vendor to bake in my platform key, my own platform key that I control. Right,
that would be
that'd be the right way to do it, and then I would protect that with an HSM. Like that's not just going on Dave's laptop. That key, right? That's protected with an HSM to protect. This is updating my entire fleet. You get control of that key. What's that, Tyler? So you're breaking up.
I said that just goes in your LastPass browser extension, Key Vault.
Oh my God, no! Good Lord, no. You got to protect, because that's access to the entire platform, man. Like that's God mode.
I'm only laughing because that happens.
It does happen. I was talking. So we did the Eclipsium podcast today, and we interviewed Vince Zimmer, and Vince was talking about like the struggles of maintaining integrity of boot when you have hundreds of OEMs, manufacturers that can implement it in different ways. And if you're participating in secure boot, like you got to protect the keys. Mm-hmm. Like everyone protects the keys differently, right?
The wonderful thing about standards is that we have so many of them. Speaking of which, if you don't mind, I didn't have many stories.
Yeah,
but one of the stories that I did have was around software bill materials and CISA in CISA. You know, tomato, potato.
No, CISA tells me it's CISA.
CISA tells I pronounce Linux. Okay, yeah. Oh man, we went old school with that one. They're intending to release some guidance on SBOMs and what they should actually contain, because right now, depending on which way you go down, there's three different SBOM formats. There's SPDX, there's CycloneDX, and there's one that's kind of out there, and I can't remember what the name is because it's not, in my opinion, it is not as well supported. That the standards are still very vague about what is minimum requirement in some of them, and how they should be generated and how they should interact, and how they should even interact with some of their enhancements for like vulnerability information, such as VEX and VEX CSAF. So like SBOMs are close. VEX are like the new upcoming that is still Wild West, and VEX CSAF is like, yeah, no, there's no Wild West. This is just the pure wilderness, and there are still buffalo roaming here. Like this is, yeah. So,
and VEX is vulnerability exploitability exchange.
Yes,
interesting.
So it's effectively you do a software bill of materials, and you find that you're running glibc version. I'm just going to throw it out there. glibc version 2.4, whatever version.
You're running Jenkins. Yeah.
You're running Jenkins. Yeah. You're running glibc version 2.4, and version 2.4 has a bunch of CVEs associated with it. Mm-hmm. There you go. Well, that's being helpful to know. Like, having glibc 2.4 is great, but like glibc 2.4 has these issues you need to consider. And maybe you should upgrade. Maybe you should consider how you secure your devices in your environment, and so forth. Then CSAF gives you the opportunity for the vendor to come back and say, hey, yeah, we use glibc 2.4, and there's this vulnerability. Let's turn this to OpenSSL. We're using OpenSSL version 1.0, and there's a CVE that is for SSL version 1.0, and the individual calls that are vulnerable in here we don't use, and in fact have been stripped from our binaries, and we're not using them. So it's an opportunity to have that chain of, hey, there's this thing in the bill of materials. There's a vulnerability, but we've chosen to risk accept it because it gives the ability for the vendor to respond back to that. And a lot of this stuff is still Wild West, and there is not a good defined standard. Some fun stuff here for me, anyways, is that I am turning to really love Alan Friedman's work.
Yes,
and
he does great stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And for being, quote, a government employee, as it were, like, he's getting shit done. And it was interesting. I had no idea that Alan Friedman ever had any idea who I was, and I went and spoke at the Mining and Materials ISAC a couple months ago. And when we posted on Twitter about the subject of my presentation, within a couple of hours, I had a tweet from Mr. Alan Friedman asking, "Hey, I'd love to chat and get your thoughts on it." I'm like, a luminary in the industry wants to chat about me about this new thing that I got to do.
He came on, I want to say it was Enterprise Security Weekly, like in early days, where we were like, wait, what is this SPOM thing? Like, Alan, what are you talking about?
Yep.
Like, dude, you need to come on and talk about this. So that's in the archives for sure. We should probably bring Alan back, obviously, because it's been a lot of development since we've last
yes,
done a
lot of developments. S4 conference was huge for Alan, and from my understanding about some of the conversations he had there, arguably because some of the conversations he had was with folks at Finite State. So I think it'd be fascinating to have come back.
Yeah, absolutely. Well,
it's just the two of us now.
It's just the two of us.
Like, they're dropping like flies.
I know. Well, that concludes the show for this evening. Thank you, everyone, for listening and watching this edition of Paul's Security Weekly. Larry, take us out.
Out? You say? You like over and out?